Hey guys, what's up? Today we're listening to Creed, High School DxD. So sit back, relax, and just enjoy the ride. And hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And if you're one of the OGs, welcome back. You already know, it's about to get real.
Chapter 1: The Fated Encounter. On the northern outskirts of Marimures, a region that serves as a border between Romania and Ukraine, there stood a fairly small orphanage on a mountainside. The building was very old, its crumbling structure making it seem as though it might collapse at any moment. Not far from the orphanage stood a small, aging chapel. Aside from that, there were hardly any houses, let alone a village anywhere nearby. It was a very isolated place, a sharp contrast to Marimures' reputation as a fairly popular tourist destination in Romania. Clank clank. The sound of a metal bell clanking broke the peaceful silence surrounding the orphanage as the sun rose in the east. Guys, wake up. It's already past 6. It's time for morning prayers. Sister will scold us if you don't wake up soon. The voice belonged to a teenage girl, around 15 years old. She had a typical Eastern European appearance, with beautiful brunette hair tied neatly in place. She said this as she opened the door to a room containing 7 people, all of them still sleeping comfortably despite lying on nothing more than thin sheets of fabric. The sheets were too flimsy to even be called beds, yet it was as if the coldness of the floor did not bother them in the slightest. 5 more minutes, muttered a 7-year-old boy half-conscious, drooling all over the sheet. Dracula is cute, came the voice of a little girl on the other side of the room, speaking in her sleep. Ghhhkkkk, ghkkkk. An ugly snore came from a chubby boy around 10 years old, sleeping with his arms spread out as if he were being crucified, a rather strange sleeping position. Hearing their responses and seeing that no one even bothered to wake up after the irritating clanking of the bell in her hand, she clenched her fist in frustration. Why you guys? Her gaze then shifted to a boy sleeping in the corner of the room, facing the wall. And you, Jay. As the oldest among them, you should be setting a good example for your siblings. You should be the one waking up first and leading them to morning prayers, she said. The boy named Jay then turned around, as if he had not been sleeping at all and had simply chosen to ignore her. I wasn't even sleeping though, he said, looking at her with deep black eyes and noticeable dark circles beneath them. You didn't sleep all night again, even though sister already scolded you a few days ago? The girl, whose name was Elena, let out a sigh of disbelief. Well, the book sister gave me yesterday was really good. I couldn't help reading it all night. So technically it's her fault, right? Jay replied as he yawned, closing the book in his hand before standing up and walking toward Elena, only to snatch the bell from her hand. What are you doing? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Watch and learn, Jay said. He took a deep breath then. Wake up, it's time for breakfast. He shouted at the top of his lungs, and not long after, all the children snapped their eyes open, as if a magnetic force had been triggered by the word breakfast. Breakfast? I'm coming. Jay smirked at Elena, who stood beside him, completely flabbergasted. All right, I'm going to wash my face. You handle the rest, he said, handing the bell back to her before leaving the room and disappearing down the hall, leaving Elena frozen in silence. What was even the point of snatching the bell from me? Elena thought, just before she was swarmed by the kids. Elena, where's breakfast? What are we having? Is it potato stew? I hope it's potato stew. I don't like stale bread. Questions flew at her from all directions, and she could not answer a single one of them, because breakfast was not even ready yet. That little. She clenched her fist, fighting the urge to run after Jay and smack him on the head. In the end, she only sighed in defeat, accepting her fate. Right now, all she could do was figure out how to calm down these chaotic embodiments known as children. Sigh. Being an older sister is a tough job. It was a beautiful morning, warm sunlight gleaming through the forest and bathing the vast, grassy land in gold. Between 2 maple trees, Jay lay alone on a hammock, fast asleep. Today, as usual, he would be taking the orphanage's cows out for their breakfast, letting them graze in the meadow not far away. No matter how I think about it, it still feels ironic that I'm taking livestock out for their breakfast when I haven't even had mine yet, he muttered, closing his eyes again. Breakfast was not a big deal for Jay. Not just for him, but for everyone in the orphanage. They were unsurprisingly poor, and the only way they could earn enough money to put food on the table was by selling the milk the cows produced to nearby villagers. It was already remarkable that they had managed to survive for so many years doing just that. Donations were rare. No one really cared to give money to a small orphanage isolated from society. Occasionally, there were contributions from former orphans who had once lived there. Most of them had moved to the city in search of a better life, leaving this place behind. They were busy building lives of their own, and it was already generous of them to share a portion of their hard-earned money to help feed children they did not even know. Jay was not ungrateful. He understood that. I wonder if I'd do the same if I ever got out of this place, he thought, staring up at the sky as the wind gently swayed his black hair. As his thoughts wandered and his eyes drifted shut, he suddenly felt the atmosphere around him fall unnaturally silent. There were no birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the low sounds of the cows. Jay was naturally gifted with exceptionally sharp senses, far more sensitive than those of a normal human. He did not even know why he possessed such a talent. Then the silence broke. A sudden earthquake jolted him. The ground shook violently, flocks of birds burst into the sky, and the cows began to scream in panic. Ugh! Jay groaned in pain as he was thrown from his hammock and hit the ground. The fall scraped him slightly, though the bleeding stopped only seconds later. He crawled toward the open field, struggling to keep his balance as the earth continued to tremble. An earthquake? As he tried to analyze the situation, a dim light flickered deep within the forest ahead of him. Moments later, the vibrations subsided. Jay pushed himself upright, dusted off his clothes, and scanned his surroundings, trying to piece together what had just happened. Then he remembered the faint glow he had seen when the quake struck. That light, this earthquake is probably have something to do with it, Jay muttered. Should I go into the forest? He glanced back toward the orphanage on the hillside, hidden from normal human sight. If Sister or Elena found out he had gone into the forest alone, he would be grounded for at least a week, and the thought made his chest feel tight. Well, that's only if they find out, he said with a dismissive shrug. Leaving the cows behind as they calmly returned to grazing, as if nothing had happened, Jay stepped into the forest, carrying only the stick he used to herd them. As he walked deeper toward the source of the light, his body began to tremble slightly, as though an invisible force were pulling him forward. There's no doubt about it. That light caused the earthquake, he thought. After walking for some time, Jay finally reached the place he believed to be the origin of the light. Just as he suspected, the sight before him was astonishing. Dozens of trees lay shattered and uprooted, strewn across the ground. But Jay's eyes were not focused on the destroyed trees. On the contrary, his attention was drawn to the center of the crater. Lying on the ground was a boy, probably around the same age as him, unconscious. He had dark silver hair, pale skin, and a surprisingly handsome face. His clothes were torn apart, and numerous scars marked his small body. Jay relaxed slightly as the trembling in his body finally stopped. He approached the boy hesitantly, knowing he had to check whether the boy was still alive. He could not just leave someone unconscious in the middle of the forest. This boy, he muttered. Jay tried to wake him by gently poking him with the wooden stick in his hand, but the boy showed no sign of movement. Is he dead? Even with his heightened senses, Jay could barely detect any pulse from the boy's body. After a brief pause, he crouched beside him and reached toward the boy's neck to check for a pulse. Before his fingers could touch skin, the boy's eyes snapped open, catching Jay completely off guard. Wadash! In an instant, the boy grabbed Jay's wrist. The movement was so fast Jay did not have time to react. At the same time, he felt something sharp press against his neck. You have 5 seconds to identify yourself and explain why you're trying to grab my neck, the boy said coldly, a pair of piercing blue eyes locked onto Jay's deep black ones. Zayyn. My name is Zayyn Kovalenko, Jay replied calmly, an almost unbelievable composure given the killing intent radiating from the silver-haired boy. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just checking whether you were alive. Silence followed. No one spoke. No sound broke the air. It was just two boys staring at each other, one of them fully capable of killing the other at any moment. After a moment of scrutiny, the silver-haired boy seemed satisfied. The pressure vanished as he withdrew his killing intent and released Jay's wrist. I thought I was going to die. That really hurt. That brat is absurdly strong, Jay thought, forcing himself to remain calm as he rubbed his wrist. The silver-haired boy stood up and checked something inside his pocket before turning his gaze back to Jay. You said your name is Zayyn. Tell me where we are, he said. That's me, Jay replied. But isn't it rude to ask questions without introducing yourself first? The boy fell silent for a moment before finally speaking. Me. I am Vali Lucian. My name is Vali Lucian. Chapter 2, The Silver-Haired Boy. Vali. Lucian? Jay asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. Is there something wrong with that? Vali responded. He seemed to notice the flicker of doubt in Jay's expression. Nah. It's just that you don't exactly look like a kid from around here. That silver hair especially, Jay noted, gesturing toward Vali's head. He paused, his gaze lingering. But you speak Romanian fluently. That's rather peculiar. Vali flinched slightly at the mention of his speech. Jay fell silent for a moment, weighing his options. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with the boy, but the silence was abruptly broken by a loud, aggressive grumble from Vali's stomach. Vali's face flushed with embarrassment as he tried, unsuccessfully, to hide the fact that he was starving. Well, if you want to get some food, follow me, Jay said. He still hadn't figured out the mystery of the boy named Vali, but he was certain of one thing. This wasn't an ordinary kid. He looked like someone on the run just by looking at the bruise on his body, though only God knew from what. For now, I'll take him back to the orphanage, Jay thought. After he's fed, I'll ask him about that earthquake from earlier. Let's go. With that, Jay began walking toward the edge of the forest. Vali hesitated, eyes darting between the forests and the retreating back of the black-haired boy. After a few seconds, he stepped forward and trailing behind Jay. He kept his eyes fixed on Jay's back, his mind racing. I'll follow him for now. I don't sense any deception in his words, and my top priority is figuring out where the hell I am. He thought. I'm back, Jay announced as he entered the orphanage, with Vali close behind. After herding the cows back into their shed, he led the silver-haired boy inside. You said you lived in an orphanage, but I don't see anyone, Vali remarked, looking around the empty halls. It's time for the daily biblical lecture with Sister. Everyone will be in the chapel until noon. That's why it's so quiet. You aren't attending the lecture? Vali asked. I don't believe in religion. I see, Vali murmured, having no intention of prying further into that particular topic. They finally reached the dining room, where a single boiled potato sat alone on the wooden table. Well, it's nothing fancy, but I'd say a boiled potato with a sprinkle of salt makes for a decent breakfast, don't you think? Jay said, handing the food to Vali. Vali looked down at the potato in his hand for a long moment. Wait here. I'm going to find some clothes for you to wear, Jay said, turning to leave. Wait, what about you? Vali called out. You said you haven't had breakfast yet. Hold on, let me cut it in half. Before he could pull the potato apart, Jay spoke over his shoulder. Don't worry about me. I don't usually eat breakfast anyway. You can have all of it. He walked out of the room, leaving Vali standing alone with his thoughts. Vali remained there like a statue, struggling to process what was happening. To him, sincere kindness was a very strange thing indeed. So guys, this is Vali. All eyes turned toward the silver-haired boy standing beside Jay. The reactions were mixed. Some stared at him openly, curiosity written all over their faces. Others looked indifferent, clearly more interested in whatever they were doing before being interrupted. One or two simply tilted their heads, trying to figure out whether this strange boy was important or not. Jay, on the other hand, was smiling far too proudly. The kind of upright grin that will put Archangel Gabriel to shame. Vali immediately felt even more awkward. He scratched the back of his head. Hello. I'm Vali. Are you bleaching your hair? The blunt question cut him off instantly. Vali froze. The voice belonged to a chubby boy around 10 years old, pointing directly at Vali's head with an expression of genuine curiosity. Andre, Elena snapped, immediately hitting him on the head. That's rude. Ow, Andre muttered. I was just asking. Elena sighed, then turned to Vali. She studied him closely, her sharp gaze lingering just a bit too long. Vali shifted uncomfortably. Sorry, she said. We don't get visitors often. Jay cleared his throat. All right, since we're doing this properly, let me introduce everyone. He pointed at Elena first. This is Elena. She's the oldest here. 15 years old. Acts like everyone's mom. I do not, Elena protested. You do, several voices replied at once. She clicked her tongue but didn't deny it. Jay continued. Those two over there are Iakob and Ili. Two identical boys looked up from the floor at the same time. They were clearly twins. Same hair. Same face. Same mischievous grin. I'm Iakob, one of them said. And I'm Ili, the other added. They switched places when no one was looking. Vali blinked. You're identical. That's the point, they said in unison. Jay nodded. They're inseparable. Also trouble. Hey, Iakob said. We prefer creative. Jay ignored him and gestured toward a small girl hiding behind Elena's leg. And this little one is Mihia. She's the youngest. Mihia peeked out shyly, clutching Elena's sleeve. She waved with 2 fingers. Hello. Vali lowered himself slightly so he wouldn't seem intimidating. Hi. Mihia smiled, then immediately hid again. Jay pointed toward a boy sitting near the wall, quietly watching everything unfold. That's Philip, Jay said. He's shy. Don't expect him to talk much. Philip flinched when his name was called. He nodded once, eyes dropping back to the floor. Vali nodded back. Nice to meet you. Philip hesitated, then nodded again. Jay finally pointed back at Andre. And that baked potato is Andre. Andre raised his hand proudly. Sup. Vali hesitated. Why baked potato? Because he's round, warm, and always hungry, Elena replied flatly. And healthy, Andre added. Jay crossed his arms. Debatable. A few kids laughed. Vali felt the tension slowly fade. The noise. The teasing. The warmth. It was strange. Different. Jay, noticing Vali's expression, then looked at him. You good? Vali nodded slowly. Yeah. I'm just thinking about a few things. And for the first time since waking up in the forest, he meant it. Jay studied Vali's expression for a couple seconds before shrugged it off. All right then, also there is also someone you need to meet. Jay said. Vali raised his eyebrows. This is dangerous one, so be careful. Dangerous? How? Jay leaned closer and lowered his voice. You could say she's the devil itself. Before he could finish the sentence, a sudden grip clamped down on the top of his head. Hard. Jay yelped. Ow, ow, ow. Oh! A calm but unmistakably sharp voice spoke from behind him. I wonder who exactly is the devil you're talking about, him, Zayyn Illya Kovalenko? Vali stiffened. A full government name. Jay froze completely. Sister, he said nervously, forcing an awkward laugh. How was the prayer? All good? The grip tightened. Now I'm the one who should be asking questions, the woman said. How was the prayer for you? Jay winced. Exactly, she continued. Because you weren't there. Again. Jay avoided eye contact. I was busy. Busy, she repeated slowly. She finally released him. Jay immediately straightened up, rubbing his head. Hey, it's true, I was feeding the cattle. MHM. Vali turned his attention to the woman. She wore a simple nun's habit, worn but clean. Her posture was relaxed, yet carried authority without effort. Her face was gentle, framed by dark hair streaked faintly with gray. Her eyes were kind but sharp enough to miss nothing. The children immediately straightened. Sister Andrea, they greeted. She nodded at them, then shifted her gaze to Vali. The moment her eyes met his, Vali felt something subtle press against him. Not hostile. Not aggressive. Just observant. Now, why do you guys didn't tell me that we have a guest here? Sister Andrea said. This is Vali, I found him lost near the grass field, so I took him here. Jay said, twisting the truth. Sister Andrea contemplating a little bit, lost in a thought. And Jay shaking internally, thinking she would find out. But on the contrary, Sister Andrea pat Vali's shoulder. What is your name, young man? Vali instinctively straightened. My name is Vali. Sister Andrea stepped closer, examining him for a moment longer. She noticed the bruise on Vali's hand and feet. Well, everyone does. It's just that she thought it would insensitive of her to ask about that. Nice to meet you, Vali. My name is Andrea. You're welcome here, she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Treat it like it's your home. Vali paused. I could stay here? Of course. A gentle smile on Andrea's face. Her grip was warm. Steady. It's just that this place isn't much, we share our food, bed, and pretty much everything, she continued, so if you don't mind sharing with us, you could stay as long as you want. Vali swallowed. Thank you, he said quietly. She smiled. Then she turned back to Jay. And you, she said calmly, will join prayer tomorrow. Jay sighed. Yes, ma'am. Good. Sister Andrea gave the room one last glance before heading toward the hallway. Be kind to our guest, she added. As she left, the room slowly returned to its usual noise. Jay exhaled in relief. See? Told you she was dangerous. Dangerous? Vali looked at the doorway where Sister Andrea had disappeared. For reasons he did not yet understand, that warmth returned to his chest. And just like that, the afternoon came to a quiet close. A few weeks passed in the blink of an eye since Jay and the others first met Vali. In that short time, his presence had quietly woven itself into the orphanage's daily rhythm. At first, he had spoken little. He watched more than he talked, observing how the children moved through their routines, how Jay handled responsibilities far beyond his age, how Elena kept order when things inevitably fell apart, and how Sister Andrea treated all his bruises and wounds without questioning anything. Vali learned quickly. Faster than he should have. He helped with the chores without being asked. Carrying water, repairing broken furniture, herding the cows alongside Jay in the early mornings. His movements were precise, controlled, as if even simple tasks required restraint. The children warmed to him in their own ways. Mejia followed him around whenever she could, offering shy smiles and tugging at his sleeve. Philip began sitting closer during meals, speaking only a few words at a time, but always choosing Vala's side of the table. Even the twins Iacob and Eli found endless amusement in trying to surprise him, only to fail every single time. Andrea still asked too many questions. Elena watched him closely. She never voiced her concerns, but she noticed things. How Vali rarely slept. How he sometimes stared at nothing at all, eyes distant, as if listening to something only he could hear. Sometimes even if he slept, he occasionally waking up in the middle of the night. Sister Andrea noticed too. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Vali during prayer, her hand tightening slightly around her rosary whenever he stood too close to the chapel walls. Jay noticed everything. He noticed how the forest grew quieter when Vali was nearby. How the air felt heavier at times, charged with something unseen. He noticed how Vali never spoke about his past, and how his eyes hardened whenever the topic drifted toward devils or miracles. Still, life went on. Laughter returned to the orphanage. Meals were shared. Evenings were spent under dim lantern light, stories exchanged between children who had learned to survive with very little. And for the first time in a long while, Vali felt like he had found a home. The night was calm. Moonlight washed over the chapel roof, silver and soft, illuminating the weathered stone beneath them. Above, the sky stretched endlessly, scattered with stars that felt close enough to touch. The forest beyond the hills slept in silence. Vali sat near the edge of the rooftop, knees drawn up, gaze fixed on the moon. Vali? You haven't slept? Vali turned his head. Jay was climbing up from the chapel's upper window, moving with practiced ease. There was no proper access to the rooftop, yet somehow they always ended up here. It had become their place. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere untouched. Jay? Vali asked. Nightmare? Jay shook his head as he sat beside him. Nah. Just needed some H2O. Then I noticed you weren't in your bed. He glanced at the empty rooftop. Figured you'd be here. Vala smiled faintly. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the cold stone beneath them contrasting with the warmth of the night air. What's up? Jay asked. Vali hesitated. Then he spoke softly. These past few weeks, they've been some of the most precious moments of my life. His voice carried no exaggeration. Just truth. Jay laughed lightly. What's that supposed to mean? Isn't that what family's for? Making memories. Like surviving Elena's unseasoned stew. Vali chuckled under his breath, but the smile that followed was quieter. More distant. Family, huh? Jay noticed it immediately. He looked at Vali, really looked this time. The way his eyes dimmed just a little. The way his posture stiffened whenever the word was spoken. Jay didn't know what Vala's life had been like before that day in the forest. But he knew pain when he saw it. Jay had nothing in this world except this place. Sister Andrea. Elena. The kids. They were his family. His world. His everything. And he would do anything for them. Want to talk about it? Jay asked quietly. Your life. Before. Silence followed. Vali turned to look at Jay, their eyes meeting under the pale moonlight. Hazel and blue. Human and something else. Vali looked away again, staring at the stars as if gathering courage from them. Then he exhaled. Yeah, he said. There's something I need to tell you. Jay stayed silent, letting him speak. A secret, Vali continued. Something I've been hiding from everyone here. Jay's expression didn't change. Okay. Vali turned back to him. His face was serious now. No trace of the boy who laughed with the children. No warmth. Just honesty. Do you believe me, Vali asked, if I told you I'm a half-devil? Jay blinked. What?
Wait. Hold up. Stop for a sec. Look, if you've already made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on, subscribe, bro. All right, I see you rolling your eyes. I'm moving. I'll get out of the way now so you can get back to the good stuff. But seriously, stick around and finish listening. It's worth it.
Chapter 3, Vali Lucifer. What? The word slipped from Jay's mouth before he even realized he had spoken. He stared at Vala's blue eyes with both confusion and "is this guy serious?" stare, waiting for laughter. Waiting for the punchline. Waiting for anything that would tell him this was just another strange joke layered on top of an already strange night. Jay let out a short, awkward laugh before he silenced. You're joking? Right. Vali did not answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Moonlight reflected in Vala's blue eyes, and for the first time since Jay had met him they were trembling. Not with fear. With resolve. No, Vali said quietly. I'm not joking. Jay swallowed. Okay. Then is this some kind of what you called it, method acting or something? Because if it is, you really have no talent on it. Vali closed his eyes. A faint pressure rippled through the air. Jay felt it before he saw anything. Not suffocating, but pressured atmosphere. The night seemed to pull inward, as if the world itself had leaned closer to listen. Then it happened. With a sound like fabric tearing through space, something erupted from Vala's lower back. 8 wings. Bat-like. Massive. Pitch black, yet shimmering faintly under the moonlight, as though veins of darkness flowed beneath their surface. They unfurled slowly, deliberately, each movement heavy with weight and presence. The rooftop creaked beneath the sudden shift in mass. Jay's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened. His mind froze. Holy, Jay whispered. God damn it, you are not joking. The wings stretched outward, casting long shadows across the chapel roof. The moonlight traced their edges, revealing sharp curves and a texture that was unmistakably real. Not costume. Not illusion. Real as the wind blowing his hair. Vali opened his eyes again. Now do you believe me? Jay didn't answer immediately. He stared. Blinked. Rubbed his eyes. Pinched his cheek. Looked again. They were still there. Jay began, then stopped. He laughed again, weak this time. I'm definitely dreaming. He never taking alcohol in his life, but this must be how everyone feel and see when they high. Denial. Vali shook his head slowly. You're not. Jay exhaled, running a hand through his black messy hair. Okay. So let's assume for a moment that I'm awake and not dreaming. And those 8 bat-like wings behind your back are real. He then looked up at Vali. You're telling me you're a devil? Half devil, half human, yes. The devil you mean, the one with 2 big horns on their forehead, blood-red skin and red eyes, influencing human to do evil, that kind of devil? Jay asked again, just to make sure. Well, in the real supernatural world, that imagery and persona is somewhat exaggerated by human interpretation, however it's not wrong either because some of them do look ugly and do evil. But yeah, that kind of devil. Jay leaned back, resting his palms on the stone rooftop. Huh. That lack of reaction surprised Vali more than anything else. That's it? Vali asked. You're not screaming. Or running. Or praying. Jay glanced at the chapel below them. If Sister Andrea hears screaming in this late night, I'm going to meet the second devil. Vali almost smiled. Almost. Jay grew quiet again. He contemplated what response should he give Vali, as this revelation is just so outlandish, out of this world literally, and unthinkable to even imagine. He don't even believe in God. There is not a single time the thought of devil existing in this world ever crossed his mind. Vali just waiting for Jay and let him gather his thought. So, explain. Vali hesitated. He folded his wings inward slightly, as if trying to make himself smaller. Where should I start? Start with the part where the world apparently isn't what I thought it was, because God knows how is there are what you called a supernatural world, which I assume people like you, I mean devils, truly exist. Jay replied. Then move on to the wings. Vali nodded and take a deep breath. The supernatural worlds are both the location and the residence of where mythological beings such as gods and Buddhas, devils, fallen angels, dragons, souls, and various other worldly entities dwell upon. He began, which Jay cut him off. Jay frowned. As in, capital G God? The biblical God. Yes. Though there are many gods. Not just the biblical one that you and others knew very well. Vali sat beside him again, wings tucked close, shadows pooling around them. The world you and I live in, Vali continued, is shared. Humans just don't see most of it. It consisted of landmass of the multiple heavens, the various realms of the underworld, and the dimensional gap. Most supernatural beings avoid human society unless necessary. Jay listened closely. There is heaven, Vali said, as you familiar with, ruled by angels and archangels. There is the underworld, ruled by the devils, especially the 72 pillars. And there are independent pantheons too, such as Norse gods, Greek gods, Hindu gods, many others. Jay raised an eyebrow. That's a lot. To think beings that worshipped by almost every religions in this world would actually be exist and thriving is baffling to Jay. That's not even everything, Vali replied. There are fallen angels, he continued. Creatures who defied heaven and were cast out. Some became devils. Some became something else entirely. Jay nodded slowly. So where do humans fit into all of this? Vali looked at him. Most humans live normal lives. Unaware. But some awaken to magic. Jay stiffened. Magic? Yes. I mean, it's nothing new. There are a lot of magicians since the dawn of humanity. Some of the most famous throughout history that you probably would have known are Merlin Ambrosius, Mephistopheles, Johann George Faust, Medea of Colchis, etc. Vali said. Humans can become magicians through study, contracts, bloodlines, or awakening latent abilities. Jay stared at his hands. You're telling me there are people out there shooting fireballs and summoning circles while the rest of us are worried about algebra exams? Vali gave a small nod. Yes. Jay let out a breath. That's mildly unfair. Vali actually laughed at that. Well, magic isn't easy. Human magic, for example, arguably 10 times harder than your typical science and math, as it is just basically solving an equation to form a magical phenomenon. And different races' magic also different in concept to each other. Vali added. It takes discipline, knowledge, and often a price to do magic. So technically I could learn magic too? Jay asked. Of course, but before you asked. I did not have a capability to conduct a human magic, since I grew up in the underworld and mainly taught to use devil's magic instead. Hearing that, Jay disappointed a little. Imagine what could he do with magic. That must have been really fun to able to create a fireball or harnessing the wind. But other than magic, human also have another meaning to gain power. It's called a sacred gear. Vali then continued. Sacred gear, also known as God's artifact, are items with powerful abilities bestowed upon humans and human hybrids like me. After he said that, a pair of white dragon wings appeared on Vala's back, with 8 blue energy almost translucent feathers. And I happen to also have one of them. Jay glanced at Vala's wings with awe. It's beautiful and hypnotic. After that, Vali then withdrawn his wings. Then if you are a half-devil, your parents. Vali went quiet. Yes, he said. My mother was human. My father. He hesitated. Is a devil of a pretty prestigious bloodline, you could say. Jay turned fully toward him. Is that why you run away from your house? Vali closed his eyes. Yes. The moonlight dimmed as clouds passed overhead. My father believed strength was everything, and because of my potential that exceed himself, he abused me. Vali said. Power? Pride? Prestige. That's the way it's always been in the devil society, and that's who he is. Jay clenched his jaw. Everything I do would be classified as a disobedience, rebellious action. Vali continued, voice steady but hollow. He reminded me of my place. Jay said nothing. He told me humans were weak, Vali said. That my mother was a mistake. That my compassion was a flaw. Jay image of Vali change again. He taught that a devil would be a powerful, domineering presence, but looking at Vali, it's almost feel like they are no different than humans. Vulnerable and fragile. So I ran, Vali said. I escaped into the human world. I hid my presence. Suppressed my power. Jay looked at him sharply. That earthquake. Vali nodded. I lost control. Just for a moment. Jay leaned back again, staring at the sky. So you're telling me devils exist? Angels exist. Magic exists. And one of them, which is your father, beating you just because you have the potential to surpass him. Vali looked at him. Yes. Jay was silent for a long time. Vali watched him carefully, bracing himself. Fear. Disgust. Hatred. Anything. Jay finally spoke. That sucks. Vali blinked. What? That sucks, Jay repeated. No kid deserves that. Devil or not. Vali stared at him. You're not afraid of me? Vali said quietly. Jay shrugged. I should be. Probably. But no kid deserved that kind of treatment, especially from their own family. Devils or not. Vali felt something twist in his chest. What about devils? Vali asked. You don't hate them? Jay's expression darkened. There's a difference, Jay said. Between what something is and what it does. Vali swallowed. Jay met his gaze. You didn't hurt anyone here. You helped with chores. You laughed with the kids. You shared food you didn't need to. Jay pointed at him. That matters more to me than the fact that you have horns or wings. Vali felt his throat tighten. Thank you, he said. Jay scratched the back of his head. So, I guess it's fair that we properly introduce ourselves now. Vali nodded. Vali Lucifer. Jay blinked. Lucifer? Yes. Jay whistled softly. That's quite a name. He then smirked. Zayyn Illya Kovalenko. Vali repeated it slowly. Zayyn Illya Kovalenko. Jay smiled. Jay's fine. They sat together beneath the moon, human and half-devil, secrets laid bare. They didn't talk much after that. The night had already given them more truth than either of them could properly digest. Jay stretched his arms, yawning as if he had just discussed the weather instead of the structure of the reality itself. Guess we should sleep, Jay said. Tomorrow's gonna be awkward enough without us looking like zombies. Vali nodded. Yeah. They climbed down from the rooftop one after the other, careful not to wake anyone. The orphanage was quiet, wrapped in the deep stillness of midnight. Jay headed toward the kids' shared room, pausing only to glance back. Hey, he said. Whatever you are, you're welcome here. Vali held that look for a second. Good night, Jay. Night, Vali. The door closed softly. Vali remained standing in the corridor for a moment, listening to the distant rhythm of breathing from sleeping children. The warmth of the place lingered around him like a fragile illusion. A place to be called home, he thought. His throat felt dry. He decided to grab a glass of water before going to bed. The kitchen lights were off, so he moved quietly, guided more by memory than sight. After filling a cup, he drank slowly, grounding himself. Just as he set the glass down, something prickled at the edge of his senses. A presence. Cold. Heavy. Familiar. Vali froze. The sensation wasn't strong, but it was unmistakable. Suppressed, hidden poorly, like someone wearing a disguise they had never practiced in. No, he thought. It can't be. Carefully, silently, he moved toward the back exit that connected the chapel to the orphanage grounds. The wooden door creaked faintly as he opened it just enough to peer outside. Moonlight spilled through the window into the narrow alley between the stone chapel and the orphanage wall. And someone was standing there. A tall figure cloaked in dark fabric. Crimson eyes glinted in the shadows, sharp and predatory. The air around him warped faintly, as if reality itself rejected his presence. Vala's blood ran cold. So you really are here, the devil said, voice smooth and cruel. Young master. Vali stepped back instinctively. You shouldn't be here. The devil chuckled. Your disappearance caused quite the disturbance. Lord Lucifer was displeased. Vala's hands clenched. Go back. I'm not returning. Oh, you misunderstand, the devil replied, taking a step forward. I wasn't asking. Another step. It was an order. Vali felt his power stir violently in response, instinct screaming at him to fight, to flee, to destroy. But this was the orphanage. One wrong move and the devil vanished. Vali barely had time to react before a hand grabbed his throat, slamming him against the stone wall. The impact rattled the alley. You've grown careless, the devil hissed. Living among insects. Vali gasped, wings threatening to manifest. Then, clank. Metal rang sharply against stone. The grip on Vala's throat loosened instantly as the devil leaped back, eyes wide. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley. Barefoot. Wearing simple pajamas. Blonde hair loose around her shoulders. And in her hand, glowing faintly with holy radiance, was a sword. Its blade hummed softly, pure and lethal, symbols etched along its length burning with divine authority. Sister Andrea. She yawned lightly, resting the sword on her shoulder. Honestly, she said calmly, don't you think attacking a little kid a little bit too much, devil? The devil stared. This is not your problem, exorcist. Sister Andrea smiled. The sword flared brighter. Oh no, she replied sweetly. I am an ex-exorcist. Chapter 4, Resolve. Vala's eyes widened, the relief of seeing her instantly crushed by the realization of the mortal danger she was now in. Sister Andrea, the last person he expected, the one person wholly dedicated to God, stood before him. She was barefoot on the cold stone, wearing only simple night attire, yet she wielded a weapon that radiated absolute authority. It was a light-based sword, its golden black hilt molded perfectly to her palm, and the platinum blade reflected the sharp, cynical moonlight. Runes, faintly humming with contained divine energy, traced lethal paths along its length. Are you okay, Vali? Sister Andrea asked, her voice a steady bomb despite the weapon in her hand. Her gaze was fixed on the devil, but her concern was genuine as it fell upon the angry bruise blossoming on Vala's neck. Sister Andrea. Vali swallowed the lump in his throat. He had been terrified for himself, now he was terrified for her. The dark phantom who had been hiding in the alley's deep shadow stepped forward, pulling the moonlight's full focus onto his face. Sister Andrea and Vali could clearly see the devil now, sharp, almost vampiric features, skin so pale it seemed to leach the color from the air, and eyes like pools of dried, stagnant blood. His thin, predatory smile revealed teeth just a little too long. It was Berjekwel the Cruel, an executioner among Lucifer's subordinates, a name Vali knew well from his father's distant, fearful whispers. Ha 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 ha, Berjekwel laughed, the sound grating and unnatural in the silence of the night. He tilted his head, regarding Sister Andrea with the detached curiosity of a predator assessing a particularly foolish prey. This is funny. Truly funny. Do you even have the slightest idea who are you protecting behind you right now, woman? Sister Andrea remained utterly still, her posture one of serene, unshakable readiness. Her grip tightened on the sword. Fancy me, she replied, her voice low and even, utterly devoid of fear. Berjekwel sneered, spreading his arms theatrically, his shadow stretching and contracting like a living thing. That child is a devil. A descendant of Lucifer. The incarnation of an old evil that your scriptures, your very faith, demands you destroy. Vali flinched, instinctively bowing his head. He braced himself for the inevitable judgment, the fear, the revulsion that always followed the revelation of his heritage. Especially after a couple of weeks hiding it from the very person in front of him. But Sister Andrea did not move back. Instead, she took a decisive step forward, placing herself fully between Vali and the devil. The faint divine aura around her seemed to grow warmer, pushing back the cold darkness. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in this land, she recited, her voice gaining strength, drawing power from the ancient creed. Her eyes, usually soft and blue, were now chips of hardened sapphire. Be it the Lucifer itself, as long as he is my guest, I will protect him. The absolute simple conviction in her words struck Vali harder than any physical blow. He never believed unconditional kindness back then, but every single day he spent in this isolated, old orphanage is just the very definition of that. Berjekwel's cruel smile vanished, replaced by a look of lethal frustration. Such self-righteous foolishness, he muttered, shaking his head. The shadows beneath his feet began to bubble and writhe, coiling like countless sleeping vipers. Then very well. I shall grant your death. The moment the words left his mouth, the alley exploded into chaos. Berjekwel did not physically move, he simply dissolved into the shadows, his form melting into the blackness that clung to the stone walls. The darkness surged outward like a tide, instantly swallowing the moonlight and plunging the narrow space into suffocating obscurity. Sister Andrea? Get back. Don't let him catch you with the shadow. Vali shouted, his warning sharp and immediate. Sister Andrea responded with a nod before took a step back. Vala's reaction was instinctive, instantaneous. His fear for her fueled the raw power in his core. Divide. A blinding sapphire blue light erupted from his chest. Translucent, shimmering dragon wings of pure sacred energy burst from his back, overlaying the black, demonic wings beneath them in a paradoxical, glorious clash of power. The divine dividing, the sacred gear of the White Dragon Emperor, roared into life, stabilizing his body against the overwhelming pressure of Berjekwel's shadow manipulation. Berjekwel materialized in the air barely a meter behind Sister Andrea, his hand carved with darkness and sharp claws lunging toward her neck, a strike meant to kill silently and instantly. But Vali was faster. He lunged forward with inhuman speed, a sonic boom ripping the air as his fist charged with rapidly draining, wholly infused energy slammed into Berjekwel's torso mid-materialization. The blow was devastating, not just physical force, but a shockwave of sacred power designed to rip apart supernatural beings. Divide. Berjekwel was hurled backward like a rag doll, his body smashing through the brittle stone wall of the chapel's outer structure. The sound was deafening, a sickening crunch of rock and bone. The impact created a massive, jagged breach in the wall, debris showering down into the courtyard. Sister Andrea moved before the dust had even settled. She was a blur of holy energy springing forward into the wreckage. Her platinum blade cut through the swirling smoke and shadow, its light pushing back the suffocating darkness Berjekwel was attempting to generate. She vaulted through the hole, landing lightly amidst the rubble, sword raised and ready. And then with a clean cut, a white slash cut Berjekwel's left hand before he could dematerialize into shadows, making him taking a step back, but Sister Andrea didn't stop there. She thrust her sword, aiming straight to Berjekwel's heart, but he successfully dodged it only for a flying kick from Vali send him to the wall. Berjekwel emerged from the pile of stone fragments, his face contorted in a mask of rage and pain. Holy burns, patches of seared, smoking flesh marred his hand, but he laughed, a gurgling, defiant sound. So this is divine dividing, he spat, wiping blood from his lip. Even though Berjekwel is smiling, but he running his mind, the effect of Vala's divine dividing could be seen just by how much slower his manifestation of shadow has become. He running his mind, the combination of Vali reducing his strength and the speed and tenacity of Andrea is devastating. Bravo, young master. But still to green, unripe. Berjekwel said with a slight grin. Let me tell you something about being a devil as a fellow hybrid. I guess there is no other choice than to reveal my true form. Berjekwel is a half-devil, half-vampire. The vampire blood in him made him uniquely resilient and connected to the night compared to ordinary devil. The pinnacle of devil's prowess are their true form. He snapped his fingers as his eyes glowing like embers. Vali and Sister Andrea felt the air around him vibrating differently. As an ex-exorcist, Sister Andrea knew very well what this usually means. Devil who usually looks humanly is just masking their true appearance and nature as the devil, the true form, the opposite of the stray's devil who usually embraced it. Bone crackle. Berjekwel's face shape turn ugly, almost bat-like with elongated ear and nose. Skin creased, turned into dark gray abomination. And suddenly, 8 pairs of bat-like wings emerged from his back, flying into the moonlight, manifesting the eclipse as the darkness emerged. Behold my true form. The shadows obeyed. The blackness beneath Sister Andrea's feet suddenly solidified, rising up and wrapping around her ankles and shins like thick, cold iron chains, locking her in place. She stumbled, momentary surprise flashing across her face, disrupting her attack rhythm. Berjekwel seized the opening. His own shadow stretched unnaturally, slithering across the rubble and rising up behind her, forming a solid, grotesque silhouette poised for a stabbing strike from her blind spot. Vali roared, his power surging again in a frantic attempt to break her free. Divide. Divide. The blue energy pulsed, stripping the ambient power from the air, weakening the demonic hold. He drove himself downward like a comet, slamming his fist onto the ground where the shadow was attempting to rise. The shockwave of sacred force tore through the solidified darkness, forcing Berjekwel to instantly withdraw the attack before it was shredded. The battle spilled out of the confinement of the alley and into the open chapel grounds. Stone slabs cracked and fissured under the impacts. Windows shattered from the sheer force of the sound waves. The metallic clang of the chapel bell rang wildly as debris struck it repeatedly, its sound echoing across the dark like the bell of End, rang a terrifying anthem. Meanwhile, inside the old orphanage, the violence was no longer distant. It was a terrifying tremor that shook the foundations of the building. Jay was jolted awake by the immense cracking sound of the chapel wall breaking. The ground trembled beneath his small bed. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, scrambling upright. Elena burst into the hallway, her hair wild, her eyes wide with fear. "Jay? Wake up. It sounds like the roof is falling off." The other children, startled and crying, began to emerge from their rooms, huddling together in the narrow hallway. Dread, sharp and icy, pierced Jay's sleep-fogged mind. He knew instinctively this was not a storm or an accident. He threw open the front door and sprinted onto the lawn. And what he and the kids froze dead, his breath catching in his throat. The scene before their eyes are straight from the biblical hero story, a fantasy, illuminated by the clashing energies. Vali, magnificent and terrible, hovered midair, his divine dividing radiating intensely, the roar of the dragon's power echoing around him while trying to catch Berjekwel, who is gliding like bat and teleporting like shadows. Below, Sister Andrea, weapon held high, fought with focused righteous fury, deflecting and carving through tendrils of kinetic shadow. What in heaven happened in front of my eyes? Jay taught. He then turned to look at the others. Mihia and Andrea tightened their grip on Elena's long skirt, while Iakob and Ilya hug each other in fear. Philip, just standing, froze like a statue. And Elena, as much as she trying to held up. The trembling on her body is too real. The devil's shadow was no longer passive. It was a monstrous, writhing entity. Vampire-like familiars, skeletal and fast, with glowing crimson eyes, began peeling themselves from the main mass of darkness. They hissed like steam, their gazes sweeping the battlefield for weak points. Their eyes found the children huddled in the doorway. Jay's heart seized. "Oh no, they're coming. Sister Andrea? Vali!" he screamed, the sound lost in the din of the battle. Vali and Sister Andrea instantly reacted to the voices, their heads snapping toward the orphanage entrance. Sister Andrea especially widened her eyes in fear. "Oh no, not them." Berjekwel smiled, a slow, sickening movement of his lips. A diabolical thought crossed his mind. "Oh," he purred, his voice carrying clearly, cutting through the chaos. "It seems like we have a visitor here, he. No? Don't you dare." The shadows surged, the summoned vampire familiars redirecting their trajectory away from Vali and Sister Andrea toward the easy prey clustered at the doorway. Sister Andrea screamed a warning, abandoning her attack pattern. She sprinted backward across the threshold, trying to positioning her body to shield the children. Her sword, meant for slaying devils, was now used defensively, its light a desperate barrier. "Run! Get back inside! Go! Now!" she shouted, shoving the terrified children further back, her focus entirely fractured. Vali roared in despair, a sound more animal than human. He dove downward, a blue torpedo, intercepting the fastest familiars midair. The divine dividing ripped through the vampire creatures, tearing their shadowy forms apart, but there were too many. They flowed around his attacks, overwhelming his defensive perimeter, all aimed at the vulnerable children. Berjekwel pressed his advantage with merciless efficiency. He abandoned all focus on Vali and Sister Andrea, knowing he had successfully destabilized the battlefield by threatening the innocents. Sister Andrea's attention was hopelessly split. Her eyes darted from the advancing shadow creatures to the children she was trying to shove to safety. She was distracted, losing her rhythm, losing her absolute focus. It was a fatal lapse. A mistake born of compassion. And for a creature like Berjekwel, that was more than enough. The air around Sister Andrea turned violently cold. Her own shadow, cast by the intense energy of the battle, twisted and elongated. Berjekwel emerged, not taking a step, but simply out of her shadow on the ground. He was instantly on her back, his movement so fast it defied the eye. His weapon, a long, curved claw which his own hand, colored of obsidian black. The sound was wet. Sharp. Final. The platinum sword, the light of her defense, slipped from Sister Andrea's grasp. It struck the ground with a soft metallic thud, its light fading instantly as a dark, blossoming stain of blood spread quickly across the back of her thin nightgown. A stab of hand pierced her heart like butter. Her eyes widened, staring sightlessly over the heads of the children. Her mouth opened, silent words of disbelief and farewell trapped inside. Vali froze mid-flight, the roar dying in his throat. The night held its breath. "Sister? Andrea?" Jay's voice was a thin, broken sound, a lost gasp of absolute terror that finally pierced the sudden silence. "I'm sorry." She collapsed forward, her body failing, the last vestiges of her divine light extinguished, the dark, victorious world rushing up to meet her. That night she failed. Chapter 5 Creed. "Sister!" A raw, collective scream ripped through the courtyard, a sound of absolute immediate despair that echoed off the surviving chapel walls. Elena clutched the terrified Mejia, her face a mask of shock and tears. Iacob and Eli, the mischievous twins, huddled together, their small bodies trembling uncontrollably. Andre, usually focused only on food, whimpered incoherently, and Philip, the quietest of all, simply stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the horrific tableau. Jay was the center of the stillness. His eyes, fixed on the spreading dark crimson stain beneath Sister Andrea, were wide and utterly blank. The shock was a cold physical presence constricting his chest, making the very air suffocating. This was not the simple unfairness of their impoverished life, nor the grand abstract cruelty of the devil Vali had confessed to. This was the brutal, wet finality of violence that had claimed the one person who anchored their shattered world. Still in the air, Vali, momentarily magnificent yet powerless in his silver scale mail, watched the sacred light extinguish. The sight of Sister Andrea's body, skewered and collapsing, surrounded by Berjekwal's triumphant, swirling blackness, struck him with a pain colder and sharper than any divisional tear. It was the pain of utter, crushing failure. No, this can't be. He clenched his armored fists, his body shuddering with an internal energy turmoil that threatened to destabilize the newly formed balance breaker. "So you will finally accept this, partner." The ancient deep voice resonated in his head, echoing hum of the ancient Draig wine. Albion, the White Dragon Emperor, rang within the crystalline fortress of Vala's mind. "Why you? Albion? Embrace my power, young host. You have broken the initial seal. Now let your body feel the pinnacle of dragon. Crush this filthy creature with my power." Vali didn't resist the counsel. He didn't question the sudden, desperate surrender of his will. His focus was singular, absolute. The limp form of the woman who had offered him an unconditional compassion and kindness. The blue energy around him erupted, intensifying tenfold. The ground beneath the chapel grounds shuddered violently, cracking under the force of the immense energy spike. An ancient, powerful dragon hum, the deafening song of the White Dragon Emperor, vibrated through the night. Vala's eyes, visible behind the helmet's visor, snapped open, blazing with icy determination. Balance breaker. A blinding flash of pure, sapphire blue light pulsed outward, a shockwave of sacred power. Berjekwal staggered backward, forced to shield his eyes. In that blinding instant, the light coalesced into a storm of raw, focused energy. The divine dividing scale mail erupted from Vala's soul, encasing him in flawless, ethereal silver armor. It was sleek, aerodynamic, and utterly terrifying. The divine dividing scale mail, the full manifestation of the White Dragon Emperor's power, achieved at the tender age of 13, a feat history should have called impossible. Berjekwal stumbled back, his mind reeling. No way. Ha ha ha. To be able to awaken the balance breaker at the tender age of 13 years old. This is unprecedented. This adventure becomes more fruitful than I thought. Lord Rizavim shall be ecstatic if he heard this news. The boy is already ultimate class potential. He thought. Before Berjekwal could stabilize his thoughts or his shadow reserves, Vali moved. He was no longer the boy, he was the White Dragon Emperor's host, an engine of pure destruction. He vanished and reappeared, delivering a kick charged with devastating dividing power. The force was so immense, so focused, that it struck Berjekwal through his hastily raised shadow barrier, searing his body and shattering his composure. Berjekwel was hurled across the courtyard and into the remnants of the broken chapel wall in a catastrophic impact that pulverized the remaining stone. What the fuck? I can't even see him. He moves in the blind spot of my focus. Berjekwel thought furiously, spitting blood, pulverized stone, and strands of his dark hair. The half-devil finally cleared his vision, perceiving the terrifying silver figure. Blue, translucent dragon wings beat the air, blinding Berjekwel with their sheer, undiluted energy. Divide. 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 Vali chanted, his voice combined with the Albion's voice resonating in the air with every syllable like an ancient mantra. With each cry, the energy field around Berjekwel violently contracted, stripping his power, his vitality, and his connection to the ambient darkness. Shit, this can't be. Berjekwel felt his supernatural energy, his vampiric resilience, which is his shadow manipulation, being reduced drastically, nearly 87.5%. He was being neutralized at a terrifying rate. He was a high-class devil, 1 foot across the threshold of the ultimate class, but the absolute systematic neutralization of the balance breaker was overpowering him. Yet, Berjekwel was confident in his species' specialization. The shadow feeds him, he is bound to it. He understood the fundamental flaw in the divine dividing. It was a war of attrition, and he had resources Vali, in this unsustainable state, did not. This is just a matter of stamina. The energy consumption of that armor is astronomical. Let's see how long you can handle this, Vali Lucifer. Vala's strength in this balance breaker form was undeniable. To be able to pressure a high-class devil who was borderline ultimate class was a feat that crushed all expectations of his power. Vali was driving him purely by rage and grief, pushing the scale mail far beyond its intended limits. But Vala's relentless assault suddenly ceased. The silver dragon armor hovering above the courtyard tilted, the helmet snapping down toward the ground where Sister Andrea lay. Vali too knew the flaw. He had stripped Berjekwel to near powerlessness, yet the devil was still standing, regenerating slowly in the deep shade. Instead of engaging in a direct contest of stamina, Berjekwel knew he needed a way to force Vali to break his protective shell. He needed an unresolvable distraction. In a maneuver of cynical tactical genius, Berjekwel dematerialized entirely, melting back into the shadows of the ravaged courtyard, confusing the rampaging Vali. Vala's enhanced senses screamed a warning, but the energy drain of the balance breaker left him too slow to pinpoint the exact location. Berjekwel reappeared in a localized explosion of darkness, not near Vali, but directly behind the kids who was still huddled in abject terror in the orphanage doorway. "Well, well, young master," Berjekwel purred, his voice regaining its oily confidence, amplified by the shadows that clung to him. "Look at your pitiful human weakness. I see your mother must be so proud of you right now," he said sarcastically. Vali froze midair, the sound of his own breathing labored inside the helmet. He saw the children Elena shielding Mejia. The twins, Iakob and Ili, pressed against each other. Andrea and Philip trembling, their faces streaked with tears. They were his family. The quiet weeks, the shared hammock, the stale bread, and the warmness that filled his heart. No. From the ground, thick, black, shadowy hands sprouted like lethal plants, their dagger-like fingers hovering just inches from the children's necks, poised to execute them. "Now stop the armor," Berjekwel commanded, his voice turning cold and absolute. "Stop this pointless battle and come with me quietly back to the underworld. Their lives for your obedience." Vala's teeth ground together inside his helmet. The specter of Sister Andrea's lifeless body dominated his vision. He would not lose them too. He could not. Don't believe every single word that came out of his filthy mouth, young host. No. Albion, you don't understand. I won't let they die because of me. Albion's ancient voice was devoid of emotion, purely tactical. You have shown your strength. It's futile, host. Now either we kill him or he will control you. In the grand scheme of things, a mortal connection will only hurt you. These human emotion, your connection to them, is irrelevant. They are not irrelevant. They are everything. They are the only family I have. I won't let you dictate my creed, Albion. I am the host of the White Dragon Emperor, and I will protect them even if it costs my freedom. Vali fought back internally, the conflict between his newfound, fragile humanity and his cold devil-dragon instincts tearing him apart. Then fight, young host. The Lucifer blood, an ancient blood run through your veins, and dragon's power emanating from your own existence. Don't let his words control you. I'm sorry, Albion. Vali lowered his head, the blue light of the scale mail flickering violently. His heart felt like cold, crushed glass. The power he had unleashed, the power he needed now, was already an unsustainable burden. He knew Albion was right. He only knew them for weeks. It's fated to be only small part of his life as Lucifer. But to him, that small part is already enough to fill his heart. He had to choose. Vali inhaled a shuddering breath, the air whistling through the vents of his helmet. I'll come with you, Vali croaked, the words thick with defeat. Stop this. Remove the shadows. If you touch them, I will find you and I will reduce your soul to nothingness. Berjekwel's smile returned, triumphant and sickening. Good boy. I always knew the Lucifer blood had sense. Now unbind the armor. With a scream of tearing energy, Vali dropped the scale mail. The silver armor dissolved into motes of blue light, leaving him kneeling as his body radiating debilitating exhaustion. The tension broke. Berjekwel laughed, dissipating the menacing shadowy hands that had hovered inches from the children. As the immediate lethal threat receded, Jay's body finally unlocked. He moved not with magic but with the desperate instinct. He scrambled over the rubble and rushed toward the collapsed figure of Sister Andrea. Sister Andrea? Sister Andrea! Jay cried, sinking onto his knees beside her. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, her face pale. She looked at Jay and somehow, through the overwhelming pain, she managed to focus. A thin, frail smile touched her lips. Jay, I'm sorry for my failure protecting all of you. Her voice was barely a whisper, a strained, final effort. Jay shook his head. No, how can it be your fault? He taught. The other children rushed forward, crying and calling her name, but Jay was already holding her, the crimson on her back staining his hands. I have a friend, Sister Andrea strained, the words flecked with blood. In a place called the Emerald City. To go there, you must find the chapter library of Verona, in Italy. Meet someone there. Her weak hand lifted, gripping the simple silver chain around her neck. She pulled it free, laying a small, chromed pendant into Jay's trembling palm. The pendant was cool against his hot skin, covered with a distinct four-crossed fleur-de-lis symbol etched into the metal. Just show them this pendant, she whispered, her gaze soft, filled with a last desperate plea. Take care of them, Jay. All of them, Elena, Andrea, Mihai, Iacob, Ilya and Philip. You are their older brother. Promise me you will keep them safe. Tears finally breached Jay's control. He sobbed, the grief ripping through him, echoing the anguish of a boy who had lost his only mother. I promise, Sister Andrea. We'll go. We'll be okay. She gave a final, gentle squeeze of his hand, a soundless, peaceful exhale escaping her lips. Her eyes went dull, fixed on the sky above the destroyed chapel. Sister Andrea was dead in Jay's arms. Jay's scream of anguish tore through the night, a sound of absolute devastating loss, joined instantly by the hysterical, heartbroken wails of Elena, Mihai, and the others. Vali watched, tears mixing with sweat and blood on his face. He staggered to his feet, ready to walk toward the devil, his mind reeling from the sight of Jay's utter grief. He took one step toward his captor. And that was Berjekwel's opening. The half-devil, who had been momentarily distracted by the death scene, moved with terrifying, cynical speed. Berjekwel seized the back of Vala's neck, his fangs elongating. He bit down hard, sinking his teeth into Vala's jugular. Vali cried out, a strangled gasp of pain. The venom and shadow-infused blood instantly spiked his system. His consciousness reeled, his strength already spent from the balance breaker, and the energy drain collapsed completely. He was a dead weight. As Vala's vision swam and faded, Berjekwel extended his true power one last time, reveling in the cruelty. From the ground, thick, hardened shadows erupted like deadly obsidian spikes, not the feints he used before, but solid, razor-sharp forms of condensed malice. The shadow spikes shot through the children, impaling them where they knelt weeping around Sister Andrea. Mihai, Elena, Andrea, Iacob, Ilya and Philip, all of them were killed instantly, pinned to the earth like macabre trophies. The terrifying, gruesome recreation of Vlad the Impaler's cruelty was the last, agonizing sight Vali saw. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't call on Albion, whose power had been utterly drained by the sudden balance breaker and the subsequent loss of vitality from the venomous bite. He was a powerless captive, his strength refusing to manifest. Jay, Elena, Andre, Iacob, Ili, Mihia, Philip. It's my fault. I'm sorry. His consciousness plunged into total darkness as Berjekwel lifted the limp body of the White Dragon Emperor's host. Jay felt the world shatter into pieces, not with the sound of breaking stone, but with the silent, overwhelming wave of loss. Sister Andrea's lifeless body was heavy in his arms. The tears streaming down his face were hot, but the core of his being was cold, colder than the Maramir's winter. The final sounds were the muffled, sudden screams of his siblings, cut short by brutal silence. Jay didn't look up. He didn't need to. He knew they were gone. Mihia. The shy smile, the two fingers waving hello. Andre. The constant hunger, the baked potato he loved the most. Ili and Iacob. The inseparable, creative chaos, switching places when no one was looking. Philip. The quiet presence, the shy nod. Elena. The tired sigh, the maternal protection. They were all gone. The sanctuary was decimated. His only world annihilated. Grief turned into hatred, pure and distilled, began to rise in his chest. It was not mere anger, it was a physical, terrifying force that drove out the sorrow. He felt the cold touch of the ground on his back, the warm, sticky blood of his sister soaking his clothes. Why? Why did they have to die? His spirit, already an empty void, began to resonate with a power he never knew he possessed. From the deepest part of his soul, a dull purple light began to pulse beneath his skin, steady and sure, a burgeoning, destructive inferno. The purple flame, the sign of Incinerate Anthem, a sacred gear of the highest order, dedicated to the judgment of sin, began to erupt from his very pores. No fucking way, ha ha ha, that's the Incinerate Anthem, one of the 13 Longinus. This already perfect day is becoming even better. Berjekwel laughed hysterically. But before the flame could fully ignite, before Jay's consciousness could recognize the birth of his own destiny, the purple light was violently choked. The power, sensing the extreme hatred for all things supernatural and the deep sorrow surrounding the chapel, twisted. The purple light was instantly suffocated by a darker, colder, full of judgmental neutrality. The power of a black flame said to exist only in the deepest part of hell, the antithesis of the sacred light, yet still possessing a terrifying holiness. Berjekwel, about to teleport away with the unconscious Vali to Jay and claim the sacred gear, felt the shift in the air. He paused, looking intensely at the kneeling boy. What is that? Not divine power. Not demonic. But it tastes holy yet so cold. Don't tell me a subspecies balance breaker? Berjekwel's confusion was absolute. He knew and familiar with one of the holy relic, one of 13 Longinus Incinerate Anthem, he fought with one of the wielder in the past. Purple flame, it should have been that. But this is different. Jay felt the cold black flame envelop him. His entire existence was now dedicated to one singular purpose, judgment. The terror was gone. The grief was superseded. Only pure, burning rage remained. The ancient song filled his head. As the bell tolled, it sang the anthem of the end. Jay, the boy who did not believe in God or the devil, gained his power in the ruins of the faith he never held. As the black flame enveloped him, he felt the true weight of his purpose, the true nature of his power. He who was ordained to judge the wicked, cast forth the flame of righteous wrath. And by holy fire were sins unmade, consigned unto the deepest abyss, where neither name nor memory endure. He clutched the chromed pendant, the relic of the dead sister Andrea, the cool metal a sudden anchor to his burning soul. Hatred filled his being, becoming his creed, his only reason for existence. Thus were the transgressions burned to naught. And silence reigned where darkness once dwelt. Jay looked up, his deep black eyes now glowing with a cold, terrifying black fire that absorbed all light but burned hotter and brighter than the sun. He saw Berjekwel, the devil, still holding Vali. The true cross of Golgotha. His voice, ragged with unshed tears and the nascent power of his sacred gear, was a whisper that carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. I shall exterminate every single one of them. Chapter 6, True Cross. The air in the ruined courtyard was no longer cold, it was searing, yet the source was a black flame, utterly devoid of warmth. This strange heat was the only movement, licking at the shadows, pushing back the endless night. Incinerate Anthem, or the chief mourner's crucified stand of purple flame, was one of the 13 Longinus, the highest classification of sacred gears. It was a holy relic, rumored to be part of the fragments of the true cross on which Christ was crucified, alongside the true Longinus and the Sephiroth Graal. Incinerate Anthem granted its wielder the ability to create and control powerful purple holy fire, a devastating judgment against creatures of darkness, often an instant kill for high-class devils and even non-devils. Or so Berjekwel thought. The flame blazing around that little boy was clearly not the sacred gear Berjekwel was familiar with. It was black, a color that tasted of the deepest, most primordial abyss, yet its energy signature was agonizingly holy, pure anti-demonic essence. A subspecies balance breaker when you just awaken your sacred gear. This is astonishing to say the least. In front of him the figure of Jay stood unmoving, an empty expression fixed upon his face. Hollow like a puppet whose strings had been cut, with no soul left to pilot the shell. He was barefoot, the black flame blazing underneath his feet, yet he showed no sign of pain, no sign of life. His gaze was fixed not on the devil but on the chromed pendant in his hand. The last remaining connection to Sister Andrea, the woman who had been his mother figure all his life, the only paternal warmth he ever felt in this world. It was all gone now. His family reduced to impaled, silent figures in the carnage. Berjekwel, momentarily stunned by the transformation, still cradled the unconscious Vali. He had captured the White Dragon Emperor, his main objective secured, but the potential power emanating from Jay was too tempting, too unique to ignore. I mean, it's just the same fire at the end of the day. As long as I'm out of range, there should be no problem. A balance breaker is taxing. He cannot maintain it for long, especially after just awaken it. Almost all the characteristic of 13 Longinus are known throughout the supernatural world, as they have a special classification that is unique to each other. That's also true for Incinerate Anthem, which has its unique classification as an independent avatar-type sacred gear. Its balance breaker took on the form of whatever object or being it was fundamentally bound to, manifesting its destructive purple flame through that anchor. But, where is the object manifestation? The last time Berjekwel had faced a wielder of Incinerate Anthem, the balance breaker had taken the form of a great sword, blazing with purple fire. Now there was nothing. No sword, no spear, no scythe, no traditional cross. Just a boy standing in the cold moonlight, wreathed in black, destructive flame. Yeah, whatever, Berjekwel muttered, his devil's pride overcoming his caution. He could not be thwarted by a grief-stricken child. He flung the unconscious Vali aside, momentarily safe on the ground, and let his shadows flow. A horde of dark spears erupted from the ground, the condensed malice of his shadow manipulation, driving towards Jay. They surrounded the unmoving boy, poised to create dozens of holes in his body. But as the shadow spears came within mere inches of their target, a devastating wall of black fire erupted from Jay's position. It was instantaneous, a flash of utter darkness that devoured light. The shadow spears vanished without a trace, burned into nothingness. What? Berjekwel couldn't believe his eyes. That never happened the last time he fought against the wielder of Incinerate Anthem. His shadow burned to nothing almost instantly. How do you even able to burn a shadow? No, this is clearly different. This is no Incinerate Anthem. Jay remained motionless, his eyes dull, the black flame around him blazing steadily, consuming every tendril of darkness that dared to touch the air near him. The effect was absolute. Any shadow within a 3-meter radius of Jay was instantly incinerated, leaving a clean circle of cold moonlight-bathed stone surrounded by a creeping, aggressive black fire. Then the capricious clouds, as if obeying the devil's malice, slid over the moon. Darkness erupted, thick and suffocating, plunging the rest of the ruined courtyard into deep shadow, Berjekwel's domain. Unwilling to risk closing the distance again, Berjekwel began a prolonged, destructive assault, leveraging his environment and his remaining power. He was an executioner, not a frontal fighter, but his command over kinetic shadow manipulation was formidable. He focused his remaining right hand, weaving the surrounding darkness into concrete, physical force. He lifted massive slabs of the chapel wreckage, pieces of the stone archway and thick sections of masonry using his shadowy hands, and hurled them at inhuman speed towards Jay. They whistled through the air, projectiles of pure, destructive momentum. The moment the stone fragments crossed the flame's boundary, the result was stunningly consistent and terrifyingly absolute. They were not melted or burned like it's supposed to, but violently, in a sense, atomized. Turned instantly to dust and smoke by the cold, destructive fire. The black flame flared, consuming the mass and the residual shadow energy within it, before returning to its steady, chilling blaze. The perimeter held flawlessly. Impulse attack failed. The flame is acting as a passive, high-density energy field. It's not a barrier, it's an annihilator, Berjekwil gritted out, his pale features contorted in concentration. I need something that moves slower, something that can penetrate the field before full annihilation, or something that attacks the wielder internally. He switched tactics, resorting to his more esoteric vampiric arsenal. From the deep pockets of shadow beneath the collapsed columns, a swarm of his weakest familiars, skeletal vampire bats with pinprick red eyes, materialized. They were expendable and fast, moving with erratic, dizzying flight patterns designed to overwhelm. Go! Consume him! Berjekwil hissed, directing the swarm towards Jay. The familiars, composed of partially condensed shadow and negative energy, dove toward the boy in a dense, hissing cloud. They hit the boundary of the black fire. The process was sickeningly swift. The familiars did not just burn, they popped. Their forms evaporated with faint, dry sounds, their negative energy instantly neutralized and absorbed by the black fire. The air near Jay briefly tasted of sulfur and ozone, the remnants of extinguished malice. Negative energy is negated too. I never heard of anything like this, power like this flame, it's all burning. Berjekwil realized, his confidence eroding rapidly. The sheer efficiency of the defense was baffling. Jay wasn't doing anything, still unmoving. But the fire was on autopilot, a passive, total defense. He looked down at the unconscious Vali, then back at Jay. I cannot leave this anomaly. If this child survives, he will be a weapon against all of us devils. I must find the weakness. Berjekwil decided to test the limits of the flame's speed and density. He needed a ranged attack composed of raw, concentrated power, something fast enough to pierce the shield before it reacted. He began weaving the thick shadows of the night into a single lethal projectile. His remaining arm stretched out, pulling darkness from every crevice, every corner of the chapel ruins. The shadows condensed into a single obsidian black spear, shimmering with kinetic energy and malice, a shadow impaler of terrifying density. This was his most focused ranged strike, reserved for neutralizing tough opponents from a distance. He launched the impaler. It moved with supersonic speed, a silent black streak aimed directly at Jay's chest. It hit the boundary of the flame. Instead of being annihilated instantly, the impaler resisted. For a horrifying half-second, the black flame and the shadow spear fought a violent, energetic struggle. The flame burned against the shadow's resistance, the air cracking with the collision of all burning flame and condensed darkness. Then, with a loud tearing sound that echoed the very fabric of reality being ripped, the black flame won. The impaler dissolved, leaving behind a sudden, intense burst of heat, evaporating the space. Berjekwil felt a sharp sting of pain in his soul. That strike had cost him nearly 75% of his remaining power, and it had achieved nothing but confirming the black flame's incredible density. It is too powerful. Its reaction time is instantaneous. And the weird thing is, it doesn't even burn the ground, it's as if this flame is just burn the thing it's deemed to burn. His mind was frantic, searching for an exploitable flaw. Wait, the subspecies evolution. The Incinerate Anthem is an independent avatar type. The balance breaker manifests as an object or being. Where is the physical manifestation? If I destroy the core object, the power should collapse. He taught. He frantically scanned the area, using every spectral sense at his disposal. He looked past the flame, past the boy, into the dimensions of magic and essence. He saw the faint residual energy of the collapsed scale male, the fading scent of Sister Andrea's divine grace, and the dense, concentrated hatred emanating from Jay. But he saw no weapon. No shield. No burning cross. Just the boy, standing in his perimeter of annihilation. There is no object of manifestation whatsoever. The flame is emanating from fucking everywhere. Is that brat himself the avatar? Or is the avatar manifested only at the point of strike? If the latter, the flame is a simple, passive defense, meaning the boy is harmless offensively unless he moves or summons the weapon. Berjekwil seized on this possibility. The boy was static, consumed by grief. He had not moved a muscle since the power activated. If Jay was unable or unwilling to use the flame offensively, Berjekwil only needed to find a way to wait out the inevitable energy collapse. He could not retreat due to his pride and the danger. He could not attack directly. The only option left was to attack indirectly, to find a power source the flame could not simply burn. He switched to a more subtle, venomous assault. Focusing his spiritual energy, Berjekwal projected a curse, a subtle parasitic shadow that sought to cling to the victim's aura and drain their spiritual vitality. It was a slow, insidious attack designed to deplete stamina without triggering a violent reaction. The parasitic shadow drifted lazily toward Jay. The moment it reached the boundary, the flame did not roar, it simply flickered, a movement so minimal it was barely noticeable. Yet, the parasitic shadow, a non-physical construct, was instantly neutralized and extinguished. Berjekwal slumped, a wave of despair washing over him. The unmoving, black fire was the ultimate guard. It was anti-life, anti-darkness, and anti-magic. Every attempt to engage it, from blunt force to spiritual attack, resulted in the annihilation of his own resources. This is not a battle of resources and more. The flame is the purest form of judgment, consuming everything deemed sinful. It is beyond the power of a child. I must retreat and report this abomination to Lord Rizavim immediately, he thought, his fear finally overriding his pride. He was a half-devil, a high-class executioner, and he was being held at bay by a static, unmoving human child who had just awakened his power. The shame was suffocating. He lifted his gaze, his remaining left eye burning with venomous intent. He would take one last, absolute risk. He would use his true speed, his power to tear open the veil of space itself and force the distance. He glanced at the spot where he had placed Vali, confirming the white dragon was still safe, an afterthought now to the black flame. He began to condense his energy for a teleportation jump. And then rage flared one last time. No. I am Berjekwal. I will not run from a child. I will kill him. He taught. Pride, the fatal flaw of all devils, seized him. He would not teleport away. He would close the distance, relying on sheer speed and the element of surprise, hoping to slip past the flame before it could fully engulf him. Next, Berjekwal used his advanced shadow displacement. He dissolved into the darkness of the ruined archway and attempted to materialize behind Jay, intending to deliver a swift, decisive strike before the boy could react. He reappeared barely 4 meters away, just outside the flame's immediate perimeter. He stretched out his clawed hand, condensing his shadow power for a ranged, cutting strike. The black fire reacted instantly. It did not expand, it simply existed where Berjekwal's hand was. The flame, unimaginably hot and consuming, wrapped around the half-devil's right arm. Sun-kissed. Berjekwal screamed, a guttural sound of agony and disbelief. The sensation was not heat, but absolute annihilation. The skin and flesh did not burn away, they were instantly reduced to a black, inert charcoal. There is no pain, it's just burned to dust. He dissolved his form into shadow instantly, escaping the grip of the fire, but his right hand remained behind. It fell to the ground, a smoking, blackened stump, leaving behind a hand-shaped stain of pure ash. Impossible. My regeneration. Berjekwal frantically reformed several meters away, his body screaming in pain. The stump of his right arm, saturated with vampiric devil blood, should have regenerated in seconds. But it didn't. The wound was cauterized by the absolute cold of the black flame, burned into a slick, obsidian charcoal. It was an injury that refused to heal, a mark of judgment. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Berjekwal's vaunted pride. He was facing an entity whose mere presence negated his existence. This was not a power contest, it was an utterly humiliating annihilation. He hurled his entire remaining reserve of darkness, a massive swirling vortex of shadow at the unmoving figure. The darkness met the black flame. The fire did not push the shadow back and devoured it, growing fractionally larger and hotter with every particle of absorbed malice. Berjekwal's mind raced through ancient texts and fearful whispers. A flame that burns shadow. A holiness born from utter darkness. Anti-demonic, anti-divine, anti-everything. He knew now this was no mere Longinus. It was a chaotic anomaly. He felt the undeniable, primal urge to run. His mission was complete and the prize was secured. But his pride, the very foundation of his identity as an executioner for the pillars, chained him. It's just a fucking kid. I'm a top high-class devil. I will not be defeated by an infant. Rage, overriding logic, seized him. He abandoned caution, abandoning the logic of distance. Berjekwil exploded into motion, dissolving into a stream of shadows and reforming instantly, closing the distance to just underneath Jay through his shadow. He planned to use his remaining strength for a single focused strike with his left claw, aiming for the boy's head. His claw was mere inches from Jay's unmoving face. The black fire flared momentarily, licking the air. And then Berjekwil saw it. He saw the unblinking, hollow eyes of the boy. But what emanated from Jay was not the power of a child. It was an aura that was ancient, heavy, dark, and filled with the overwhelming, righteous grief of a million souls. It was the presence of an executioner greater than any devil. And in the space behind Jay, in the same spot where the balance breaker artifact should have manifested, a shape began to coalesce. It was massive, formed from wood as black as sin, and it was burning fiercely, silently, consumed in blazing black flame. It was an immense wooden cross, charred and ancient, easily 6 meters tall, imposing itself over the ruins of the chapel. The true anchor of this subspecies balance breaker. And at that moment Berjekwil realized that the object manifestation is not even physical to begin with. And that where he just cursed his life. Jay's lips moved. The voice that emerged was deep, echoing, carrying the infinite sorrow of the abyss. It was not the voice of Zayyn Kovalenko, the orphan boy. It was the voice of the judge. True cross. The word was the final command. The black fire surged outward, enveloping Berjekwil completely. The devil screamed not in pain, but in sheer terror as his existence was unraveled. The flame was not just burning his body. It was consuming his very essence, his shadow, his devil blood, and his stolen vampiric vitality, leaving absolutely nothing behind. It was judgment without mercy. In a terrifying, silent fraction of a second, the mighty high-class devil Berjekwil the Cruel was annihilated. He dissolved into a fine black dust, which was itself instantly consumed by the flame. The black fire flared one last time, reaching its peak of intensity before it began to recede. Jay stood alone amidst the ruin and the dead, the massive black cross fading from the air behind him. There was no joy, no triumph in Jay's hollow eyes. Only profound sorrow and endless regret. He looked at the bodies of his family, at Sister Andrea's lifeless face, at the pendant clutched in his hand. A single hot tear finally escaped the perimeter of the black flame and traced a path down his cheek. As the tear struck the ground, Jay's eyes fluttered shut. The black flame vanished completely. His entire body, having utilized a subspecies balance breaker for mere seconds, was utterly drained. The backlash of the power was absolute, pulling his energy reserves beyond zero. Jay collapsed onto the blood-soaked earth, his small heart stopping. The battle was over. The night was silent, save for the crackling of wood from the smoldering debris and the gentle wind. The air, though still carrying a strange faint chill, was breathable once more. Hours passed. The moon crossed the apex of the sky, its silvery light bathing the grotesque scene. The bodies of the children, the woman and the boy lay still in the ruins. Just before dawn, a figure materialized in the center of the devastated chapel grounds. It was a tall man, appearing to be in his late 20s, with an average lean build. He had black hair, a distinctive golden streak in his bangs, and a neatly trimmed black goatee. This was Azazel, one of the leaders of the fallen angel faction, Grigori, renowned for his strategic intellect and his obsession with sacred gears. He observed the scene, the pulverized stone, the jagged hole in the chapel wall, the eerie stillness of the air, and the numerous dead bodies. The sight immediately confirmed his prediction: a supernatural conflict had occurred here. Azazel bent, inspecting the massacre. Even hours later, he could still feel the faint remnants of demonic power, which is Berjekwil's signature. But also an astonishingly faint, dark, ancient power. It was familiar yet distant, a chaotic energy signature that momentarily piqued his curiosity. He inspected the human corpses. He noted the chilling pattern of their deaths, a clear act of malice rather than combat. He moved to Jay, noting the boy's lack of breathing and pulse, confirming death. He finally reached Vali, lifting the limp, pale body of the White Dragon Emperor. Vali's condition was severe, not only depleted of energy but poisoned by a strange residual venom that seemed to be actively suppressing his recovery. The boy is nearly dead. Good thing I tracked Albion's faint energy here when the balance breaker activated. The fallen angel leader mentally shrugged off the anomalous energy signature. His main initial goal was complete: secure the volatile Longinus user before he fell into the hands of the devils or the other factions. Azazel, gathering the unconscious Vali over his shoulder, surveyed the silent scene one last time. He felt a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that this was not a simple murder scene, but the birth of something terrifying. Shrugging off the feeling, he teleported away, vanishing into a flash of faint light as he teleported. Not long after, silence returned to the courtyard. Then, from the center of Jay's still body, a black flame, thin and thread-like, began to emanate, rising from his chest. Jay slowly opened his eyes. Chapter 7: Conviction. The air, which hours earlier had been choked with the scent of blood, ozone and metal, was now cleared by the gentle, cold breeze of dawn. Jay slowly opened his eyes. The first light of morning, diffused and pale, embraced his face, a cold caress against his skin. He lay on the blood-soaked earth, the devastation around him muted by the gray light. A profound, solemn silence had settled over the courtyard, an unbearable quiet that followed the screams and the magical annihilation. The silence was the sound of a world that had ended. Jay felt a shudder run through his exhausted body, and then the dam of his hollow heart finally broke. A tear, hot and heavy, tracked a path down his soot-stained cheek, quickly followed by another. He wept without sound, his face contorted in a silent, desperate grief that was far more painful than the theatrical wails of fear or sorrow. He wept for his mother figure, for his siblings, for the life stolen from them, and for the purity of the world that had been proven a lie. He wept for minutes, the tears mixing with the dry earth beneath him, until the wellspring of grief was utterly dry. His tears stopped, leaving behind only the cold, abrasive tracks on his skin, mirroring the transformation in his soul. When his eyes finally opened again, they were the same hazel, but they held no sorrow, no confusion, and no fear. They were empty, hollowed out, and replaced by a cold, unwavering resolution. Jay sat up slowly, the effort taxing his drained body. The remnants of the black flame had vanished, leaving him merely a boy of 13, clad in torn, blood-stained clothes, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. His gaze passed over the courtyard, cataloging the horror without flinching. His family, brutally impaled by the devil's shadows, lay frozen in their final, protective positions. There was no one left to mourn them but him. He began the grim task of collecting the dead. He moved with the slow, meticulous focus mechanism, handling each with careful reverence. As he gathered them, the numbness of his grief allowed the memories to surface, not as painful daggers, but as quiet, final tributes. He started with Philip, the quietest boy, whose small body had been pressed against the wall. Philip had never asked for much, always sitting by the window in the evening light, reading the tattered children's books Sister Andrea found. Jay remembered the sheer, silent happiness in Philip's eyes one winter morning when Jay carved him a perfect wooden toy, a joy so pure it felt like a stolen treasure. Next, he carefully disengaged the intertwined forms of Iacob and Eli. The twins were never apart, not even in death. Jay remembered their unlimited energy, the way they constantly conspired to steal extra portions of potatoes, and the intricate, impossible stories they would weave in the yard. Their most memorable trait was the shared, echoing laugh they had, a sound so identical it was impossible to tell who started it, a laugh that simply meant mischief and life. Now it replaced by the silence of a lamb. He moved to Mejia, Elena's small shadow, impaled with her hand outstretched toward the pendant Jay still held. Mejia was shy and frail, often hiding behind Elena or Jay's legs. Her most distinct memory was the way she'd offer him half of her single sweet orange on Christmas, watching his face with wide, hopeful eyes, unable to speak a full sentence but communicating everything through that tiny, profound act of giving. He found Elena next, the fiercest of them all, whose last act had been shielding Mejia with her own body. Elena had been the pragmatic, weary big sister, constantly worrying over the supply pantry. Jay remembered when he was 5, the single night he had a high fever. Elena, barely 2 years older than him, sat beside him all night, constantly wiping his forehead with a damp cloth, her usual scowl replaced by a tenderness that was raw and deeply maternal. It was a love that asked for nothing and gave everything. Finally, he approached Sister Andrea. Her body lay where she had collapsed, the crimson stain now dry. He gently lifted her, resting her head against his shoulder. He remembered the soft, calloused hand that would often rest on his head during prayers. It was a simple gesture of inclusion, of unconditional love and compassion. He remembered her scent, wood smoke, cheap incense, and old linen. Sister Andrea was the warmth that defined his entire existence. As he cradled her, the absolute crushing emptiness of her absence settled into the marrow of his bones. There were no tools for burial, only the rubble of the chapel. Jay began the arduous task of digging shallow graves in the soft, disturbed earth of the courtyard, using broken slate and his bare hands. It was a cold, brutal effort of physical exhaustion. He laid them to rest one by one. There was no prayer, no ceremonial word whispered over the graves. The silence was absolute, as cold and hollow as his heart and eyes. He covered them with dirt and stone, creating 7 rough mounds. They've always been sleeping together since they're babies, when they are kids, and until their ultimately early demise. This is a silent testimonies to the oppression of the weak. When the work was done, he slumped back, his strength completely gone. His gaze fell upon the chromed pendant still clutched tightly in his hand. Sister Andrea's final gift. He used his thumb to pry open the pendant's cover, revealing an old, faded photograph. It was a picture of 2 blonde girls of significantly different age. One a teenager, almost an adult, in a rough nun's habit, the other a little girl, maybe around 6-7 years old, wearing a faded purple robe. They were both smiling in front of a distinctly structured, old European-style library. Below the photo, 4 initials were scratched into the metal casing, AALR. And then Jay saw the specific date, lightly engraved beside the initials, January 23, 1996. He recalled Sister Andrea's strained, final message. The name of a place called the Emerald City, which he now realized was a code or a name associated with the place. He closed the pendant, the smooth metal cool against his raw palm. The immediate scorching fury that had fueled the true cross of Golgotha faded, replaced by something colder, pure unwavering hatred. He thought of the devil Berjekwel, of the casual cruelty, and of the words spoken by Vali, words that implied this world was crawling with powerful supernatural beings. The devils, angels, fallen angels, and possibly gods, all of whom treated humanity as mere pawns, cattle to be oppressed, sacrificed, or consumed. Vali, the scion of the Devil King, had felt entitled to their sanctuary. Berjekwel had felt entitled to their lives. This was not a mistake. This was the natural order of the supernatural world. They are all the same. Every single one of them. The hollowness of revenge solidified into a cold, relentless hatred. It wasn't just Berjekwel he needed to exterminate. It was the entire system that permitted the deaths of Philip, Mihia, Iacob, Ilya, Elena, and Sister Andrea. Jay made his conviction firm and simple. Kill every single one of them. The devils who reveled in cruelty, the gods who abandoned their people, the angels whose silence was deafening, and the fallen who peddled in chaos. There was no righteousness in his mind, no moral purity, only cold hatred and calculated vengeance. He was not powerless now. The ancient, unmoving, and judging black flame that had burned in his heart was the weapon for that purpose. To achieve his goal, he needed 2 things. Strength so overwhelming that even Lucifer would not dare stand in his way, and knowledge about the supernatural world he had been plunged into. Vala's words suggested humanity was the weakest faction in the supernatural world, or creature you could say, as there is no single humanity faction to begin with. He needed to be smarter and move in the shadows. And for that, learning magic was necessary. But before all of that, he would need to go somewhere. Sister Andrea's last message. He looked at the pendant. The library. Verona, Italy. The Emerald City. She had a friend there, she said. That was going to be his starting point. He picked up the holy sword that Sister Andrea had used in her defense. A beautiful platinum blade. He carefully wrapped it in a piece of black tablecloth from the kitchen, securing it to his back. He gathered a few remaining supplies, a canteen, a scrap of bread, and the money Sister Andrea had saved behind the cross in the chapel. He took one last long gaze at the destroyed orphanage building, one last trip to the memory lane. The good and the bad. A serene smile filled his face. See you later, guys. Then Jay turned his back on the ruins and walked away, not looking back, heading east towards Italy. Vali Lucifer's consciousness surfaced slowly, accompanied by a crushing headache and the dull ache of energy depletion. He opened his eyes to a foreign ceiling, one made of smooth, dark stone, crisscrossed with arcane carvings rather than cheap plaster. He was lying on a plush, velvet-covered bench in a room that smelled faintly of parchment and ozone, a stark contrast to the familiar wood smoke and stale bread of the orphanage. A jolt of panic shot through him. He sat up abruptly, his demonic energy signature flaring weakly. Where am I? Then the memories flooded back, the scale mail collapsing, Berjekwel's betrayal of his words, his triumphant bite, and the shadow impalement that cut the screams short. The sight of the children, his family, pinned like macabre specimens, slammed into him with the force of a wrecking ball. Vala's hands flew to his face, his body convulsing in silent agony. He blamed himself entirely. He had the power of the White Dragon Emperor, the sacred gear that could divide and conquer, and yet he had failed. He yielded and they died anyway. He yielded and Berjekwel had laughed at his weakness. He wept, a ragged, choked sound of pure self-loathing and grief, the tears of a devil prince who had failed to protect the only humanity he had ever cherished. The door to the room slid open silently. A tall, golden-streaked figure stood framed in the doorway, observing the weeping boy with an unervingly neutral expression. A descendant of Lucifer crying like that. Now that's a rare sight, the man commented, his voice deep and analytical, yet not entirely devoid of a dry curiosity. Compassion is the furthest attribute from a Lucifer usually. Vali snapped his head up, his eyes bloodshot, instantly on guard. Who are you? Where is this place? He demanded, trying to summon the depleted energy of the divine dividing. Relax, Vali Lucifer. You are currently within the headquarters of Grigori, the fallen angel faction, the man said, a slight, weary smile touching his lips. He stepped into the light. I am Azazel, and I'm the one who pulled your unconscious body out of a rather messy pile of rubble in Romania. Vali narrowed his eyes, caution overriding fear. You rescued me? Why? Azazel sighed, gesturing vaguely. Your sacred gear, I sense the divine dividing during my visit to Romania. Let's just say that I like collecting things of unique power. And honestly, your bloodline makes you a high-value asset too. Vali clenched his fists, the name Berjekwel burning on his tongue. Azazel, sensing the shift, adopted a more professional demeanor. Speaking of the devil, I found a lot of death there. A high-class devil was definitely present. Can you tell me what happened to him? And the children? Azazel asked, his golden eye fixed on Vali. Vali instinctively refused to mention Berjekwel, the failure too bitter to share. He simply refused to answer, looking away. His gaze darted around the room, desperately searching for a face, a familiar form, anyone who might have survived. His mind locked onto the smallest boy, the one who held the largest grief. Wait, Vali whispered, his voice cracking. There was a boy. He was my age, maybe a little younger, black hair. Did you see him? Did you save him? Azazel paused, his expression shifting from detached strategist to something more complex, pity mixed with clinical certainty. The boy with the black hair? Yes, I saw him. He was lying among the other human bodies, Azazel confirmed softly. I checked him for vital signs before I left. He was dead, Vali. His heart had stopped. They were all dead. The simple professional diagnosis he was dead was more shattering than the sight of the impalement. Vali had held onto a thread of desperate hope that Jay, his dearest friend, had survived. The final wall Vali had built around his grief collapsed. He lowered his head, his hands pulling at his own hair, the tears streaming down his face once more, thicker and hotter this time. He was completely alone. Azazel watched the raw, painful breakdown of the Lucifer heir. He was a devil weeping, not over lost power, but over dead human friends. A strange specimen indeed, Azazel mused. Deciding not to disturb the profound sorrow, Azazel nodded once, his demeanor softening slightly. I'll leave you to rest. You'll need time to recover. Meet me in another room if you have cleared your mind. Azazel turned and left the room, leaving the young old devil crown prince alone with his overwhelming guilt and sorrow. Vali wept once more, his tears falling in silence. Chapter 8, Biblioteca. Verona. A historical city nestled in the region of Veneto, Italy. It was a place steeped in narrative, famously known as the setting for Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, a city built on the dramatic cadenzas of poetic love and tragic feuds. It was also the spiritual heartland of theological literature, the supposed place where Dante Alighieri conceived some of the most groundbreaking cantos of his Divine Comedy. Yet, in the middle of all this artistic and romantic history, walking aimlessly like a confused, cold dog was Jay. It was the middle of spring, and though the Mediterranean climate promised warmth, the mornings in Verona still carried a brisk, chilly air. This was entirely irrelevant to Jay. Marimures, nestled in the cold slopes of the Carpathian Mountains, regularly saw temperatures near 0 degrees Celsius during spring nights. His body was accustomed to a biting cold far deeper than this Italian chill. He was dressed simply. Cheap, baggy dark black coat, a plain black shirt beneath it, and black jeans he had managed to buy during his transit in Budapest. The journey had taken him nearly 4 days to reach Verona instead of the estimated 16 hours by continuous travel. The main reason for the severe delay was the long, imposing object wrapped in thick black ragged tablecloth slung across his back. Sister Andrea's platinum sword. Every mode of conventional transportation he attempted, from bus, train, even the brief thought of flying, had resulted in an immediate stop due to the possession of a sharp weapon. Even when he insisted it was a ceremonial collection piece, he was refused and kicked. Refusing to leave one of the two things Sister Andrea had left him, Jay had simply decided to hitchhike the grueling distance from Bucharest to Verona. The fact that he was just a kid, pale and seemingly harmless, occasionally helped him garner pity rides, but it was still an exhausting, draining decision, evident in the fatigue etched onto his face. It doesn't matter, he thought, adjusting the strap holding the blade. I made it anyway. He did gain one crucial piece of insight from the frustrating experience. Spatial magic is definitely convenient. He realized. If he knew how to use spatial manipulation, he could store all his belongings in some pocket dimension, entirely bypassing customs and security. Even better, he wouldn't need to do all that if he could just knew how to teleport. The thought was noted in the growing catalog of skills he needed to acquire. Feeling the sharp bite of hunger as he hadn't eaten for almost a full day, where his last meal being a scrap of cheese in Venice yesterday, Jay decided to stop. He spotted a little cafe, its wrought iron tables spilling onto the pavement, just a short walk from where he had been dropped. He stepped inside, the atmosphere warm and thick with the aroma of roasted coffee beans. Un cappuccino e pane per favor, he requested. His Romanian background meant Italian grammar was still mangled, but the common Latin roots allowed him to utter the simple words he had learned during his trip from the locals clearly enough. He sat in a corner booth, the heavy sword carefully placed on the bench beside him, leaning against the wall. He then pulled the chromed pendant from his coat pocket, immediately drawn to the initials. He had contemplated them for 4 days, piecing together the mystery. He concluded that AA stood for Andrea Angelini, Sister Andrea's name. The LR must belong to the blonde little girl in the photograph. Since this photo is 8 years old, the little girl should be just a little bit older than me now. She is the friend Sister said would help me. A moment later, he was served a small cup of cappuccino and a plate of fresh, crusty bread. He ate in silence, mechanically consuming the food needed to replenish his depleted strength. The quiet domestic morning sounds of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the whisper of Italian in the kitchen were broken by the arrival of a new customer. The man stopped, looked around, ordered his food, and then inexplicably walked over and sat down directly next to Jay out of all the chair in the pretty spacious booth. Jay's empty eyes lifted, giving the stranger a half-second side glance. There are literally dozens of empty chairs there. He thought. He decided to forget it, but the man spoke before he could continue his meal. You are not from here, aren't you? The man said in surprisingly clear English. I knew it. Too obvious. Jay thought, setting down his cup. He looked at the man. A handsome young with striking blonde hair and kind green eyes. A teenager, perhaps a couple of years older than Jay. Ah, yes, Jay answered in accented English, deliberately curt, planning to end the conversation there. Ah, my name is Illya, by the way. Nice to meet you, the man insisted, offering a warm smile and an outstretched hand. I'm Illya, Jay replied, using his middle name, which was simpler and avoided his given name. But it backfired. Illya? So you're from Russia? Or Ukraine? Illya asked, genuinely curious. This guy. Jay suppressed a sigh of annoyance, sipping his cappuccino. He hated unnecessary interaction. Around that, Jay answered vaguely. Phew, that's a long journey just to get here, Illya observed, his smile unwavering. Jay just nodded, continuing his meal. Illya, however, seemed undeterred by the lack of reciprocation. He started to speak again, and this time he finally piqued Jay's attention. That's a nice sword you got there, Illya remarked, nodding toward the wrapped object on the bench. Going to the Verona Cathedral? Jay's eyes immediately fixed on Illya's. He maintained the gaze for several seconds, cold and assessing, before answering. No. Illya just smiled, a slight knowing curve of his lips. He is not lying, Illya thought internally, recognizing the subtle truth in the boy's denial. Jay didn't continue the conversation. He finished the last piece of bread, picked up the sword, paid for his meal at the counter, and left the cafe with just a polite, detached nod toward Illya. Illya simply watched Jay's back as he exited, before continuing his own breakfast who had just served. After strolling around the city and asking a couple of locals for directions, Jay finally arrived. The chapter library of Verona was surprisingly close to the Verona Cathedral, the very place that blonde young man Illya had asked about. This should be the place. He stopped before the entrance, pulling out the chromed pendant again. He looked at the background of the photo, matching the architectural details. The sign above the entrance confirmed it, Biblioteca Capitular di Verona, Chapter Library of Verona. The library was an imposing building, a structure of weighty importance. Its exterior was weathered stone, showing centuries of history, yet it held a dignified, quiet atmosphere, contrasting sharply with the bustle of the nearby tourist attractions. There were plenty of tourists milling about, but the number was manageable, not the overwhelming crowds of the arena or Juliet's balcony. Jay walked up the steps and into the interior. He expected a holy place, perhaps resembling the chapel he had lost. Instead, he found a structure that felt more like a fortress built for knowledge. His first impression was that it looked like an ordinary, albeit very old, library. The silence was immediate and thick, broken only by the soft turning of pages and the muffled steps of patrons. Jay strolled through the towering wooden shelves, a slow, meticulous study of the surroundings. The air was dry, smelling intensely of aged paper, leather, and beeswax. He was fascinated by the sheer antiquity of the collection. He didn't understand the Latin script or the theological content, but he understood the weight of history. Some volumes were so old they tracked back to the 2nd or 4th century, incredibly preserved and maintained. He walked deeper, past reading desks and hushed scholars, until he reached a particular chamber. It was a large square room, with a high ceiling supported by thick columns, split into upper and lower sections connected by a sweeping wooden staircase. A serious, formal reading hall. As he crossed the threshold into the room, Jay felt a strange, internal jolt. An acute sense of unease settled over him. It wasn't the fear that came with the devil's shadow, it was the same feeling he'd experienced when Vali had shown his vast, terrifying devil wings for the first time. Somehow somewhat it felt magical, otherworldly, but distinctly different from the pure, anti-demonic holy feeling he got from Sister Andrea's sword. This room hummed with a hidden, potent energy. The room was quiet, even quieter than any other section in the library. As Jay looked around, scanning the shelves, he suddenly felt a metallic clink sound on his hip pocket. True enough, it was the pendant, vibrating lightly, emanating a dim, faint light that was barely visible beneath his coat. It's reacting to something. The pendant, a gift from Andrea, had led him here. It was a beacon. Suddenly, the soft, deliberate sound of a footstep could be heard directly behind him. Jay immediately recognized the presence of someone who had entered the room silently. He quickly shoved the pendant back into his coat pocket. He don't want strangers to just witness such weird glowing metal pendant in his hand. Now, would you kindly tell me where you got that pendant from, kid? Well, it was the sound of a woman, her voice mature, warm, and musical, but carrying an unmistakable undertone of command and threat. Jay turned slowly to face the source of the voice. He saw a beautiful, mature woman with long, flowing purple hair that cascaded over a dark, long black dress. Her beauty was arresting, almost ethereal but artificial in a sense, and profoundly unsettling to Jay. But there was no time to admire her presence. His immediate caution was sparked by the fact that this woman knew about the pendant and recognized its power enough for her voice to shift when speaking of it. She was clearly not the young blonde girl in the photo, the friend he was seeking. "It's a gift," Jay said, his voice flat and cold, "from my sister." "Your sister?" the woman echoed, a delicate hand rising to stroke a strand of her purple hair. Jay contemplated his next move. Should I tell her? This woman was clearly steeped in the magic he sought to learn. She already knew about the pendant. What was the worst that could happen? She might know the girl, Sister Andrea's friend, and could help him find her. Andrea Angelini. Do you know her? Jay asked, watching her face closely. The purple-haired woman's brow furrowed slightly as she tried to recall the name. Andrea Angelini, she murmured, tasting the words. Then her eyes widened fractionally. Ah, the girl from the church. Yes, I remember. It's been a long time since I've seen her. How is she? Doing fine, I hope. She is dead, Jay said, his answer delivered in the same plain, cold voice he used to state the time. The purple-haired woman's beautiful face registered a flicker of genuine sadness. Such sorrowful news on this beautiful day, she murmured. There was a pause of heavy silence before the woman spoke again, her eyes drawn back to the area where Jay had placed the pendant. Could I take a look at that pendant for a second? Jay hesitated. The woman, sensing his doubt, offered a gentle, reassuring smile. Don't worry, kid, I won't steal it from you. It's just that the thing in that pendant feels intimately familiar to me. She was clearly referring to the subtle magic emanating from the artifact. After a moment of cold calculation, Jay decided the risk was minimal. He took the pendant out of his pocket and extended it toward her. As she took the metal disc, her eyes widened again, this time with true recognition, even before she opened it. Ah, now I remember why it's familiar. I remember, this is the pendant that Lavinia gave to that sister during her visit here. How long ago was that? 6, 7 years, or even 8 years? She said, her tone steeped in nostalgia. Jay's own eyes widened for the first time since his tears dried. Lavinia. That's the L. The woman had named the blonde girl in the photograph. The L.R. without even opening the pendant. She knew. Lavinia, is that the girl in the photo? Can you tell me where she is? I have to meet her. It's my sister's last message to me. I already know about the magic things, so please could you tell me? Jay pressed, his voice betraying a hint of desperate urgency for the first time. The smile on the woman's face disappeared, replaced by a serious, almost weary expression. I see. Yes, that is her in the photo when she was 7 years old, Lavinia Rennie. I, in fact, know her very well. But, Jay asked, already steeling himself for the disappointment. She is not here with me anymore. You are late, I'm afraid. I sent her away 2 years ago to an organization called Grauzoberer. And truthfully, I don't know her exact location now. She might be on a mission in America, Asia, only magic knows how far she's traveled. She returned the pendant to Jay, who took it back, his face falling into renewed disappointment. I've gone thousands of miles just to get nothing, he taught. The cold, hard reality of his journey crashed down. Sorry, kid, she said gently, turning as if to leave. Wait, Jay stopped her, the single word sharp. The woman paused. Huh? Do you want to ask another question? No. I want to ask you for something instead. Can you teach me how to do magic? Jay asked, the cold, unyielding determination back in his eyes, fixed on her purple hair. The purple-haired woman was silent for a long moment, observing the pathetic, determined human boy before her. She slowly shook her head, a faint, regretful smile touching her lips. I'm sorry, kid. I don't have the luxury of time at this moment. My work is far too demanding. Are you busy with your research? Jay pressed, guessing what she meant by work. The purple-haired woman contemplated whether she should even bother answering an ordinary human. But she decided, why not? What could this human kid do? Tell everyone that she is doing her research like a lunatic? Besides, she felt a vague sympathy him, and his cold, empty gaze is interesting to say the least. Do you know sacred gears? The woman asked, testing him. Jay immediately nodded, remembering Vali and Berjekwel. Well, I'm conducting a high-level research project about that very topic right now, which is quite time-consuming. So, unless you have something to help me on, you should probably ask someone else to teach you how light a fire out of nothing. Now let me excuse myself. She turned her body, prepared to ascend the sweeping staircase. But before she could move, a burst of vivid purple fire instantly blazed in the palm of Jay's left hand. I've already knew how to light a fire out of nothing, Jay said, his eyes challenging her. He had just activated Incinerate Anthem. He had noted during this trip to Verona that to draw out the sacred gear's basic abilities, all he truly needed was the intention and concentrated willpower. He quickly determined that this specific output was the base purple flame, not the true cross of Golgotha, which was a separate taxing state, what Berjekwel called a balance breaker, and he also remembered how Vali said balance breaker as he changed into his white armor. He instinctively knew that the black fire required a level of emotional commitment and power drain he couldn't risk casually. He noted that researching the conditions for the black flame's emergence without a full balance breaker was a high-priority short-term goal of him. While Jay was making these internal calculations, his simple words and the unexpected purple fire had a profound effect on the woman. Her beautiful, otherworldly eyes widened in genuine shock. No way. That is Incinerate Anthem. How is this kid even possess Augusta's sacred gear? She taught. The purple-haired woman's mind word. She knew for a fact that the Incinerate Anthem was currently wielded by one of her fellow magician, someone not dead. To see it suddenly manifest in the hand of a nameless, ordinary child was baffling, and the suggestion that the original wielder was dead was terrifying. "Who are you, kid?" the woman demanded, her voice losing all its previous warmth, becoming sharp and authoritative. Jay answered, letting the purple flame flicker steadily in his hand. The woman suddenly floated slightly upward, lifting off the ground with graceful ease. She looked down at Jay, the intense surprise replaced by a knowing, almost predatory calm. "My name is Glenda," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room, "but most people know me better as the Witch of the South." Chapter 9, Emerald City. The Witch of the South. The name hung in the air, weighted with power and historical context Jay couldn't grasp. After introducing herself with such grandeur, Glenda did not wait for a response. She simply began to rise, hovering gracefully in the air above the polished floor of the library. Jay's eyes widened as he suddenly felt the familiar odd sensation of lost gravity, realizing his own feet had left the ground. An invisible force emanating from Glenda lifted him with the same effortless ease she displayed. They ascended rapidly, not through the open ceiling, but directly to the second-floor gallery. Jay realized, with a chilling sense of discontinuity, that there were no visible stairs or pathways leading to this level. It was meant to be inaccessible to ordinary patrons. "Don't worry, it's just a simple levitation charm," Glenda said, noticing his momentary lack of control. "It's far quicker than using those stairs." They landed softly near the furthest, darkest corner of the building. As they did, a section of the ancient wooden paneling dissolved, replaced by the outline of a simple, unassuming wooden door. Glenda turned, her purple hair shimmering under the ambient library light, her gaze penetrating. "Now, kid, before you follow me, I just want to make this perfectly clear. I don't know how you got your hands on that purple flame, and frankly, I don't particularly care," Glenda stated, her voice returning to its firm, businesslike warmth. "My terms are simple. I will teach you magic, and I will mentor you, but only in equal measure to the help you provide me during my sacred gear research. That's what I call the law of equivalent exchange." She paused, her eyes challenging him. "There is no going back once you step through this door. Are you still absolutely sure you want to take this path?" Jay met her gaze. In his dark, deep hazel eyes, Glenda saw no young man. She saw a deep well of determination, cold, plain, and simple. There was no hot-blooded rage, only the stark absence of fear and the absolute certainty of his cause. Jay didn't need to say anything. His eyes were all Glenda needed to answer her question. "Very well, kid," she conceded, a faint, intrigued smile returning to her lips. She opened the door, stepping through as Jay followed. He stepped into a world that felt less like a city and more like a fantasy book brought to life. It was a bustling city, but everything was bathed in unnatural, powerful light. Victorian structures rose high, intricately detailed and impossibly beautiful, their architecture twisting and merging with natural elements like crystallized trees and flowering geodes. People in elaborate, flowing robes floated everywhere, moving with casual ease as if walking were an archaic burden. The sky was the most notable difference. It was bright and light-hearted, so intensely luminous it felt almost fake. But instead of the familiar whitish-warm yellow light of the sun, what Jay saw was a gigantic crystalline sphere. An emerald sun suspended unnaturally high above the city, casting a light of breathtaking, crystalline green. That's an artificial sun created by elemental magic, acting as a nexus and barrier of this place. And also, Glenda said. "Welcome to the Emerald City," Glenda announced, her voice filled with quiet pride. Jay felt the chromed pendant in his pocket vibrate for a couple of seconds, its faint pulse confirming the location. Glenda noted the movement without looking. "Since you already possess that chromed pendant, which is keyed to this city's nexus, it is not necessary for you to go through the dubious registration and orientation required for new entrance to this city, if you would call it one." As they walked through the floating streets, Jay noticed the mixture of reactions from the inhabitants. Some glanced with pure admiration at Glenda, lowering their heads in respect. Others looked upon Jay, the strange black-clad boy, with outright fear or intense curiosity. A reaction that was highly specific. The cross-shaped 4 fleur-de-lis on that pendant is a symbol of the Wizard of Oz, which is us, Glenda explained as they walked. The Wizard of Oz? That fantasy book? Jay asked, the irony not lost on him. Yes, and since the pendant is imbued with the magic of one of the wizards, which is Lavinia, it means you are an honorary guest to this place, Glenda confirmed. That's one of the reasons Lavinia gave it to your sister in the first place. It was an open invitation to visit. But that girl never came. Glenda said the last part with a straight, factual face. They soon arrived at what Jay assumed was her house. It was a seemingly humble 3-story abode, built from dark, moss-covered stone, relatively subdued compared to the shimmering crystal palaces surrounding it. Glenda led him through a small, ordinary entrance hall, past a simple kitchen, and toward a seemingly solid basement door. Glenda simply placed her hand on the door, and the wood shimmered, dissolving into a curtain of purple light that they stepped through. They arrived instantly in the basement, but what Jay saw was nothing less than a marvel of magic. The room he was standing in was merely a reception area, but beyond it stretched a vast, impossible space. Glenda's true home seemed to contain its own interior geography. There were countless laboratory rooms, filled with shimmering containment fields and strange, buzzing equipment, rooms dedicated to botany, rooms focused on alchemy. Jay lost count. But the most marvelous sight of all was the colossal, spiraled library that served as the heart of the complex. The shelves twisted upward, forming a cone of knowledge that must have contained thousands upon thousands of volumes. It appeared to spiral up nearly 100 stories high, which made no sense since he had only dropped 1 floor to the basement. If she had told him this was one of the 7 true wonders of the supernatural world, Jay would have believed it instantly. Glenda, seeing the momentary flicker of astonishment in Jay's eyes, smiled proudly. "It's spatial magic mostly," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Jay gave her a cold glance, annoyed at his momentary display of wonder. "You are painfully easy to read, kid," she said smugly, conjuring a comfortable velvet-backed chair out of thin air and seating herself gracefully. A cup of steaming tea materialized for her out of a small, shimmering spatial gate conjured by her hand. "Now, kid, before I teach you anything, let's talk about that equivalent exchange," Glenda stated, crossing her legs. "What happened? Why the desperate need for power?" She leaned forward, genuinely curious. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I know learning magic is almost a natural endeavor for ambitious humans. But you have one of the 13 Longinus. You lot usually carry immense pride, and I don't think you need parlor tricks like simple elemental magic to survive." Jay remained standing, his stance rigid, his expression unmoved. "That's not your problem," Jay said, his voice flat. "I don't ask you the reason for your research, nor do I care. Just teach me magic as I help you in your sacred gear research." Glenda's beautiful face darkened slightly, and a vein subtly popped in her temple. "You are an insufferable little brat, aren't you?" she hissed, her voice dropping. "And what do you think is stopping me from simply taking that sacred gear from you right now, tying you up, and conducting the research myself?" A cold purplish aura suddenly began to emanate from Glenda, filling the vast room with intense killing intent. The air grew heavy, thick with the power of a being far beyond anything Jay had faced, even slightly exceeding the devil Berjekwel. But contrary to her prediction, there was no single strain of fear in Jay's eyes. He didn't tense, he didn't move. He simply stood there, his hazel eyes fixed on the witch. "You can try," Jay replied. It was not confidence, arrogance, or pride. It was a simple statement of fact. He hadn't traveled from Romania to this foreign, bizarre land to just crumble at something so shallow as fear. He had made a creed to kill those who oppress the weak, and he would die clinging to that conviction. He would not curse devils, angels, and gods only to shrink in fear of another human, even if that human was demonstrably stronger than the devil who annihilated his family. Glenda watched him, her killing intent swirling around his small frame. Then, slowly, the purple aura receded, and the severity in her expression softened into a look of wry amusement. "I'm just joking, kid." "Mostly," Glenda corrected herself, taking a graceful sip of her tea. "Even though I consider myself an opportunist, I'm still a woman of honor and principles. Especially concerning hospitality in the Emerald City." She rose from her seat, walking over to Jay and playfully patting his head. "Lighten up, kid. You'll snap in half if you stay this tense." Jay just stood there in stoic silence, absorbing the bizarre shift in her personality. "Now to business. You could freely use this library anyhow you want, as magic is fundamentally a realm of knowledge and intellectual endeavor," Glenda informed him. She began laying out a schedule with a complex wave of her hand, projecting the words onto a nearby wall. "We will have a practical magic session every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and sacred gear analysis and theoretical sessions every Wednesday and Friday evening." She started to walk toward a door on the far side of the room. As she opened it, she paused, turning back to Jay. "And also, I almost forgot. As I said earlier, that sacred gear of yours is supposed to be wielded by an acquaintance of mine. Her name is Augusta, and she is the current Witch of the East." Glenda's tone became serious again. "But don't worry. As long as you are here, she will not be able to locate or harm you. This city is under my protection, and its magic is quite formidable." Jay noted the information. A rival witch in the same stature as Glenda, which he assumed would be equally strong. "Now relish it, kid. The magic." Glenda vanished through the door, leaving Jay completely alone in the impossible library. He stood for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the structure around him, then began to walk upward, drawn by the conical, spiraling shelves. The collection was breathtaking. It was a chaotic, magnificent archive of the arcane. The books were not ordered alphabetically, but by their fundamental nature. Some shelves dedicated to elemental attunement, others to advanced abjuration, entire sections focused on conceptual magic and ethereal geometry. As he explored more, there are some of books about spirits magic, fairy magic, and Fantian magic which interest him. He would be facing gods from a lot of Fantians. Even if the magic is not learnable for human, learning about your enemy prowess would be wise, and he noted to himself. And also there the angels, fallens, and devils. That's for later. He saw antique grimoires bound in what looked like dragon scale, scrolls written on what must have been ancient silk, and modern textbooks flickering with holographic diagrams of spell circles. The air was rich with potential, the silent promise of power waiting to be claimed. Jay spent several minutes walking, his mind sorting through the possibilities, his internal calculator running permutations. He didn't need parlor tricks. He needed fundamentals. He needed the source. He needed a philosophy of power that could one day confront even Lucifer, but he realized that he didn't have the correct fundamental to build that on. Hence he stopped at a simple-looking shelf. The binding worn, the paper yellowed, yet radiating a profound sense of antiquity and stability. His gaze fixed on the title of the book, written in simple, elegant script that transcended language barriers. Magic, Roots by Merlin Ambrosius. He took the book from the shelf, its weight surprisingly light, and returned to the quiet seating area, his eyes immediately scanning the introduction. His journey for knowledge had finally begun. Chapter 10, Magic. When Jay opened the heavy, worn volume of Magic, Roots for the first time, the dense, earthy scent of ancient parchment and dried ink filled his nostrils. He did not find chaos or the wild, untamed mysticism often bleeding from the pages of occult texts. What greeted him instead was order, a cold, precise, and utterly analytical system, which appealed immediately and profoundly to the analytical core of his mind. The book was written in a formal, almost archaic medieval English, its language dense and occasionally foreign and replete with obsolete spellings and capitalized pronouncements. Yet, Jay could read it pretty easily. Sister Andrea, despite their poverty, had ensured the children were deeply literate, and Jay, naturally inclined toward study, had often been left to pore over books far beyond his years. The language was a small barrier quickly overcome by his focus. The text spoke of magic not as a miracle bestowed arbitrarily by gods or capricious spirits, but as a system of supernatural equations embedded directly into the foundational structure of the world. It posited that existence itself was a vast, complex formula. Every manifestation of magic, every simple or grand spell, followed a strict but immutable rule of causality. If a force was invoked in the proper linguistic, geometric, and energetic sequence, then a predictable, specific phenomenon would manifest without fail. Magic, the text insisted with the absolute conviction of its author, was the act of understanding those pre-existing sequences and supplying them with refined intent and focused power. Jay paused, letting the implications sink in. This system defined the cosmic unfairness he had already felt keenly. Supernatural beings such as devils, angels, and gods wielded their abilities mostly by instinct, nature, and pure force of will or imagination. They were born with the intrinsic code already written into their essence. They did not calculate, they willed. Humans like him, however, had to calculate symbols and draw flawless magic circles with painstaking accuracy. On top of that, they also need to memorize incantations with absolute precision. Their power was entirely dependent on external structure, a crutch needed to stabilize the vast chaotic forces they sought to command. It's almost unthinkable how unfair this supernatural world is for human. Jay thought. The injustice of the cosmic hierarchy settling deeper into his conviction. They are born with power while we humans must build it brick by brick, and even then our walls are still significantly weaker than them. The name Merlin Ambrosius appeared repeatedly throughout the grimoire, written with unmistakable reverence, often preceded by the epithet, the magician blessed by the fairies. This guy is a narcissist, Jay thought with a flat cynicism that betrayed his age. Self-proclaimed titles everywhere. But well, can't blame him. He backed it all up. As Jay devoured the historical background sections, he realized the colossal magnitude of Merlin's contribution to the human race. Before his era, human magic was a brutal, self-destructive affair. From ritualistic blood sacrifices, desperate pacts with evil spirits, or total dependence on worshipping and channeling the diluted, often capricious energy of respective deities. Human magicians were either desperate supplicants or dark practitioners. No in-between. Merlin's self-proclaimed invention was termed the human magic, a path to power that did not require selling one's soul or appealing to a higher power. According to the book, modern and structured human magic existed because Merlin, with a genius mind that would never born for another 1,000 years, an unparalleled intellect, systematically studied the prodigious, chaotic, and self-replenishing demonic power of devils and translated its underlying principles into mathematical and linguistic formulas that humans could safely and efficiently use. He did not create magic out of nowhere. Rather, he refined and systematized raw supernatural forces and transforming them into structured spells, intricate rituals, and easily reproducible magic circle. His art favored technical mastery over brute, destructive force. His teachings detailed spells focused on constructing intricate barriers, enchantments that permanently altered environments or artifacts, and complex calculations so exact they bordered on rewriting natural law through sheer geometric perfection. Merlin introduced the concept of the magic circle as a form of thaumaturgy, a non-physical device made manifest through runes and lines as the ultimate tool for controlling and safely discharging dangerous energy. As Jay read on, a chilling realization settled in his mind. To study human magic was not merely to learn an ability, it was to inherit a precise but foreign language that Merlin had mathematically etched into the fabric of reality. One equation at a time. The depth of the knowledge required was staggering, and Jay knew that the sheer effort was why only a fraction of humanity could ever become a true magicians like Glenda and people in the Emerald City. So, in order to perform even the simplest spell, I need to draw a circle full of equations, Jay concluded, his mind already visualizing the steps. He descended the spiraling library steps, a quiet shadow moving through the impossibly vast room, and sat at Glenda's elegant, empty desk. He found ample supply of fine paper and precision pens, tools befitting a meticulous scholar of the arcane. He opened the book to the section detailing the simplest working, a low-level illumination spell, merely a directed discharge of energy. He carefully copied the circle onto the paper. It was a dizzying array of sigils, lines, and complex geometric overlaps. He worked with the meticulous focus of a clockmaker, ignoring the potential distraction of the magical library around him. Every sigil was aligned, every equation closed, and every intersection perfect. The slightest deviation could lead to catastrophic failure that backfired to him. After the circle was complete, nothing happened at first. The text warned that this silence was the most dangerous moment. A magic circle, no matter how perfect, was only a circuit, a dormant formula waiting for power and command. The human user had to become the switch. The caster must first still his breath, set his mind fast upon its anchor, and shape his intent with utter clearness of thought. For should his will be clouded or divided, the runes and reckonings would mistake his desire, and the working would turn awry, either breaking as dust upon the wind, or rebounding upon the caster in grievous ruin. Control, Jay thought as his jaw clenched. Structure above all else. No fear, no grief, just the sterile demand of the spell. Only then came activation. Jay learned that power had to be fed into the circle in a controlled flow. The energy, which Merlin called mana, needed to be guided through the lines and symbols as if tracing them from within the mind. An incantation spoken or mental served as the final key, synchronizing thought, energy, and structure into a single moment of execution. Jay closed his eyes, his breath shallow and even. He focused on the Incinerate anthem, not the destructive, taxing true cross, but the raw, focused energy source beneath it, the boundless potential of the Longinus. He channeled his will, picturing the energy moving through his core, then guiding it out and into the delicate circuit on the paper, and then a soft, almost imperceptible pop sound. The paper was instantly lightened up of bright light. Above the desk, a small, perfectly spherical ball of white light was shaped from the burning magical energy, hovered steadily. The light was stable, pure, and contained. Huh. That's easy, he thought, his expression remaining awfully flat. There was no internal cheer, no sense of pride. It was merely the successful completion of the first step of a million. If any other aspiring human magician, let alone Glenda, had witnessed this after what Jay just did in his first try execution of a magic spell anti-failure sigil, without weeks of prior practice albeit it's a simple one, and heard his subsequent thought, they would have been utterly dumbfounded. Instead of reveling, he immediately thought deeper about the core concept, realizing that while he had completed almost 500 pages of the roots in just 5 hours, its fundamental concept of energy flow was still too abstract. But what is mana? Jay pondered, his gaze fixed on the small, hovering sphere of light, a tangible result of an intangible input. Mana is ambiguous to say the least, as the book explained. Magical energy mana is no singular force born unto the world, nor a power that dwelleth within man by nature. It is a wrought thing, a subtle weaving of many forms of strength and essence, gathered and refined into one substance. It existeth not of itself, but is ever shaped from other powers, as metal is smelted from ore and fire. No man is said to possess mana, nor to be bereft of it, for it belongeth to none. It lingereth everywhere, awaiting craft and command. Only through art, learning, and careful shaping may it be drawn forth and given purpose, and without such guidance, it remaineth formless and idle, neither boon nor bane to the world. But this was written around the 5th or 6th century. The concept of conservation of energy hadn't even been formalized yet, Jay critiqued, applying a modern, clinical physics filter to the ancient mystical text. The book describes mana as a refined, derivative power, a universal currency, but it doesn't clearly define the original, primary energy sources or the conversion rate. If mana is refined, what is the raw ore and what is the process of the furnace? The ambiguity was unacceptable. To satisfy his understanding and solve the confusion surrounding the energy requirements of human magic, Jay stood up. He returned to the spiraling shelves, ascending rapidly through the power of his intense focus. He began gathering a massive stack of supplementary texts, determined to find the gaps in Merlin's 1,500-year-old knowledge. He grabbed volumes on thaumaturgy, which is the study of mystical runes, lines, and their geometric properties essential for circuit building. Devil's magic, which is the study of how raw, non-structured power is generated and wielded. Necromancy, which is the forbidden art of using life force and ambient spirit energy. Summoning magic, which is the creation of dimensional and energetic gateways to summon a creature or an object. Teleportation magic, which is an advanced spatial manipulation theory. Spirit magic filled with packs and channeling of ambient nature energies. And lastly, fairy magic, a single, slim, abstract volume detailing a highly conceptual form of magic. He also grabbed texts related to human energy concepts from religious and martial arts practices such as the control of ki and chakra. He found only a single book about sacred gears. It seems like Glenda had already took the rest of the book for her research. Jay returned to the desk, the massive stack of forbidden knowledge resting beside him. The pile represented thousands of years of human and supernatural intellectual endeavor, all synthesized by a 13-year-old boy in a black coat with an urgent singular goal: to understand magic. Chapter 11, Anthem. Hours melted away in Glenda's otherworldly library. The crystalline green light of the emerald sun outside did not set, it merely shifted its angle, casting a long geometric shadows across the vast space of Emerald City. Meanwhile, under the basement, Jay worked without break, crossing the threshold from simple reading into comprehensive analysis. The knowledge flowed into his mind, not as lore or mythology, but as systematized, chaotic data points of the supernatural world. He didn't just read the words, he synthesized the underlying equations, tracing the hidden logic behind everything from demon pacts to fairy conceptualism. A few crucial conclusions crystallized in Jay's mind, confirming the harsh reality of human limitations, a reality he was already expecting since he decided to take this path. The first thing is human energy cap. Human potential for structured magic, mana reserve, is fundamentally tied to internal biological energy, which he recognized as roughly equivalent to stamina. This is why human magical reserves are so laughably weak. We hit a biological ceiling defined by finite physical endurance. The engine is too small, and the fuel tank is always nearly empty, he thought with contempt. He remembered when he lost consciousness after using True Cross just for a couple of minutes. The second things, there is also another type of energy that human used, which is ki or chakra. Humans can naturally tap into it and control it flow, which is the art called senjutsu, or manifesting it into a physical state of ki, which is called tuki, but this method is fraught with danger. It requires the constant containment of negative emotions and the malice of raw ambient life forces from the environment. The resulting mental draining is far more taxing than simply burning through physical stamina. A fragile container for dangerous power, Jay mused. A quick path to insanity or corruption. Rejected. The third thing, humans could, and often did, use the energy of other beings such as gods and spirits, especially before or during Merlin's time. But this method required a pact or ritual. Jay rejected this idea outright. Dependence is weakness and in a sense pathetic. He already knew devils still offered contracts to humans in exchange for magic, and he found the entire transactional practice despicable, a cosmic form of slavery. Fourth thing, possessing a sacred gear or a Longinus in his case are vastly improved his energy reserve. It says that sacred gears do that by providing another type of external inherent energy from itself and integrated it with the human souls whom wields it, making it their own energy. However, it's still nothing compared to the likes of devils, which has 10 times the amount of energy compared to humans. And the most absurd thing is they can improve it by some way, that's why there is ranks and hierarchy there. But now Jay knew he had magically superior reserves to most non-wielding humans, but it was still a mortal battery, destined to run dry. And lastly, in its current state, human magic was too slow, too weak, and unreliable to him. Relying on precise calculations and slow formations, like the circle he drew, this was easily countered by some bullshit type of magic like devil's magic, which activated instantly by imagination and naturally replenished, or even the gods from pantheon's magic, which created from abstract concepts like belief. How do you even compete with that? He thought. Jay concluded that for instantaneous combat, the Incinerate Anthem was still the more effective and sensible use of his life force. But I can't be dependent on only that, he muttered, rubbing the dark circles under his eyes. The true cross of Golgotha was his trump card, his annihilation state, but relying solely on a single high-cost ability would make him utterly predictable. One-dimensional power is a critical tactical weakness, especially he doesn't know what type of opponent he would be facing to achieve his goal. Jay then started scribbling on a blank paper, listing magic types he deemed essential for survival and strategic advantage. He immediately discarded direct elemental magic as offensively redundant. His flame already covered the need for destruction with far superior efficiency. Instead, he focused on filling the gaps in his capabilities. Spatial magic like teleportation and dimensional storage is a high priority. This solved his logistical weaknesses and provided immediate battlefield mobility and escape potential. And also their multiple of use of spatial magic that he could think of, which probably would immensely helped him in the future, like transporting enemies' attack for example. The second type of magic is enchantment magic, as humans' biggest weakness is physical fragility. Enchantment could augment his body's capabilities, allowing him to survive the raw physical impacts of supernatural beings, which is going to be multiple times stronger than humans. Though he doubted it can stop a serious attack from a beings like God or Devil King, it might let him live long enough to hit them back. Now the last main priority is sealing magic, as he thought it would be a necessary countermeasure against anything that could fully neutralize or disarm his flame, or required absolute containment without destruction. Who said there wouldn't be a creature this vast supernatural world that can't be killed? Heck, are gods even able to get killed? That's one of his biggest questions. Another type of magic that he might learn in aside would be healing magic, illusion magic, and summoning magic. But since those three not as crucial as the first three, it wouldn't be his top priority. But the magic that confused and captivated him the most are a single entry buried in a footnote of the conceptual magic texts, fairy magic. It was mentioned only once, but referred to as true magic, a mystical creation of pure consciousness and self-referential concepts. It was an absurd abstract field that he knew he wouldn't understand for years, but the concept of manipulating reality through consciousness alone rang a powerful, profound bell. But after writing all the magics he want learn, he realized that it all came back to the energy cap. All that magic, while it being spatial, enchantment, sealing, was useless if the engine was perpetually weak. He needed a way to overcome the limitation of a human life force. He scribbled ideas, threw away concepts, and repeated the process of synthesis for hours, fueled only by stale air and cold resolve, until a connection sparked in his analytical mind, born from the synthesis of the roots, senjutsu texts, and physics principles. Wait, if the concept of mana is a subtle weaving of various energies and it is not purely life force, how about another readily available type of energy? Can it be converted into usable mana? He muttered, racing his mind. Suddenly his eyes, dark-ringed with exhaustion, widened, and he sat bolt upright. "The sun," he whispered, remembering the crystalline green light of the Emerald City, a fake one that illuminate the whole thing like a real one, giving life and energy. Thermal energy, he thought. His eyes widened. He realized that there is a core flaw was revealed. The Incinerate Anthem was already a source of overwhelming, infinite-seeming heat, but it still consumed his life force to activate and maintain. That was the inefficiency, the human bottleneck. If he could separate the generation of thermal energy from the cost of his life force, in theory it could work. Jay reframed the Incinerate Anthem in his mind, stripping away the symbolism of the destructive flame and focusing on its scientific output. It is in physical and magical sense produced thermal energy, not the true cross as it is something far beyond that, but the Incinerate Anthem does. Thermal energy is similar to internal energy born from motions such vibration, rotation, translation at the smallest scale. If heat is nothing more than ordered chaos at the atomic level, then its danger only comes from where that motion is allowed to propagate. Jay's idea was simple. Incinerate Anthem generated an extreme thermal gradient. If that energy could be intercepted before conduction, convection, or radiation reached his body or the surrounding environment, it could be conceptually processed and converted, transformed from random microscopic motion into structured, usable magical output which is internal energy or mana. It's in theory even able to strengthen his mortal body. Humans using senjutsu did something similar by refining ambient energy into life force, but their flaw was their mental instability. Jay envisioned using the Incinerate Anthem as a controlled thermal generator, siphoning its internal energy into a non-physical thaumaturgical framework where temperature increased vitality, converting heat into life force throughput, bypassing the biological ceiling that limited humans. In concept, infinite energy, he thought, a flat, cold vision settling in his core. Thermal energy already obeyed conservation laws as it flowed, transformed, and dissipated. His plan simply changed its destination. If life force was just another expression of usable energy, then converting heat into it wasn't sacrilege. It was just exploiting the physics of this chaotic supernatural world. But still, how to make the heat generated from activating Incinerate Anthem an economically viable energy source, outweighing the energy needed to produce it, is the hard part, he reasoned. And I need to learn thaumaturgy, the study of mystical runes, to create a stable containment matrix for that conversion. He rapidly scribbled all his thoughts, diagrams of energy flow, and potential runic sequences into a detailed proof of concept on a fresh sheet of paper, naming its project the Anthem of Life. This was his plan to overcome the inherent disadvantages of his race. As he was absorbed in detailing the complex conversion runes required, the main entrance door to the Grand Library suddenly opened, and the spell of silence was broken by the sound of expensive leather boots on stone. "Kid, are you forgetting that?" Glenda stopped abruptly, her mouth half open in a lecture she couldn't complete. She had expected to find him asleep or nervously pacing, not hunched over her priceless antique desk, which was now littered with complex magical texts, half-eaten bread scraps, and frantic scribbling. Jay looked up, startled out of his concentration. "Ah, is it time? I'm sorry, I'm going there in a minute." He started gathering his messy work, quickly shuffling the papers that contained the Anthem of Life into his coat pocket. He didn't want Glenda to know the specifics of his concept, at least not any time soon. Glenda, however, ignored the time. Her gaze fixed on the state of her pristine antique desk. Blood rushed to her face, a mix of shock at his audacity and rage at the mess. "Who told you that you were allowed to use my table, huh?" she demanded, her voice high and sharp, echoing slightly in the vast room. "That desk is an artifact. It's centuries old." "I don't," Jay replied calmly, standing up, his own focus still partially on the energy conversion equations in his mind. Glenda's composure frayed. Her vein popped out, a vivid line beneath her smooth temple, but she caught herself, her gaze snagging on the other scattered papers. She picked up a sheet containing the rudimentary magic circle and the notes on the illumination spell from the roots. Glenda's beautiful eyes scanned the runes, realizing how technically perfect they were, far too intricate for a novice. You, she sputtered, her voice catching. "Who told you to perform magic without my supervision? Do you know what happens if you fail the activation sequence, kid? The energy would have rebounded and severely damaged your internal organs." Glenda shook her head, exasperated. "This is precisely why I hate kids," she thought, sighed. "Fortunately, you haven't been able to complete it yet. Never do it again," Glenda said, scolding him. "But I already did," Jay said, his expression placid and utterly sincere. Before Glenda could fully register his words, a small, perfect flicker of red elemental fire. A structured, low-level output of the successful spell, which clearly is not the purple of his sacred gear, appeared on the edge of the paper she was holding, consuming the parchment instantly and turning it to harmless, odorless ashes. Glenda's jaw dropped completely, staring at the empty air where the paper had been only a moment ago. She looked back at Jay, who stared back with his empty, dark-bagged eyes, wearing an expression of almost unwavering innocent confusion. "What?" Jay asked, genuinely confused. Chapter 12, Sacred Gears. The air in the training chamber was heavy, tasting of ozone and the dry with sterilized scent of spent mana. This was one of the basement chamber used for Glenda's magic trial, a place where the floor was made of reinforced obsidian and the walls were wreathed in dampening enchantments that could swallow the blast of a high-tier spell without so much as a tremor. Incantation, whether mentally projected or spoken aloud, is crucial for a magician, whether you like the aesthetics of it or not, Jay, Glenda said, her voice echoing with a slight metallic ring against the obsidian. She stood perfectly still, her purple hair shimmering like a nebula. "It is the anchor for your intent. Without the words, the mind tends to wander, and in magic, a wandering mind is a death sentence." She looked at Jay, who stood 20 feet away. "But," Glenda continued, a small, predatory smile tugging at her lips, "with enough experience you can learn to compress the logic. You don't need the bridge if you've already reached the other side. And you can do something like this." She didn't move a muscle. She didn't breathe a word. Yet, in the space between heartbeats, 3 intricate, cerulean magic circles manifested in the air around her. They were sharp, glowing with the frigid light of deep-sea pressure. In an instant, 3 spheres of high-density water formed, spinning with such velocity they hummed like turbines. They launched simultaneously, 3 blue streaks aimed at Jay's head, chest, and knees. Jay didn't move. He didn't even raise his hands to guard. A violent, silent surge of purplish-black flame erupted from the floor. It wasn't an explosion, it was an erasure. The water spheres hit the wall of fire and didn't splash, they simply ceased to exist, evaporated into hot steams by the overwhelming thermal gradient of the Incinerate Anthem. Jay stood amidst the dying violet embers, his expression as flat and cold as the obsidian beneath him. His control of Incinerate Anthem had improved enormously in just 14 days. It was no longer a wild, devouring fire. Glenda lowered her gaze, her mind racing. The characteristics are wrong, she thought, her brow furrowing. She was intimately familiar with the records of the Incinerate Anthem. She knew its supposed previous user, the Witch of the East, Augusta. In all historical accounts, the Incinerate Anthem was characterized as an avatar-type sacred gear. It possessed a dense, often volatile consciousness. A flickering, sentient ego that spoke to its wielder, guiding them or mocking them, sometimes fueling their rage to keep the purple flames burning. Still nothing? Glenda asked, walking toward the center of the room. No voice? No flickering image in your mind? No sensation of a second soul trying to claw its way out? No, just silence. Jay answered, shaking his head. Glenda bit her lip. This was the core of her confusion. Usually, training for an avatar-type wielder began with months of bonding and synchronization. The user had to negotiate with the spirit inside the gear, forming a contract of wills. But Jay was in full, absolute control from the start. He wasn't negotiating with a spirit to borrow their power, he was just using it at will. But despite there is no avatar to be compromised, it's still. This is no mere genius, Glenda thought, watching the way the violet embers clung to Jay's sleeves without burning the fabric. To achieve this level of control in 2 weeks is unheard of. It's almost as if he was born with it. Humans usually have a fundamental problem processing new power, whether it was magic or sacred gears. A sacred gear especially is an external graft, a piece of system logic from the God of the Bible forced into a mortal frame. It should feel alien initially, the feeling that caused rejection symptoms or mental fatigue. Even Augusta, Glenda recalled, needed 3 months just to stop the fire from burning her own skin. And she is considered a paragon of supernatural talent. This boy, his battle experience is non-existent, he's a peanut in this big supernatural worlds, but his sheer control, it's perfect. She looked at him and for a fleeting second, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was fear. Not fear of his power, Glenda felt that she could still crush him with a wave of her hand if she was serious, but fear of his nature. He was a void that consumed knowledge like black hole. Not to mention his magic, she thought. Ever since the accident in the library, when he had activated a perfect illumination circle without her, Glenda had thrown the syllabus out the window. She had skipped the years of linguistics, the months of magic equation theory, and the tedious geometry of circle formation. She went straight to practice, and every day she regretted it a little more. One of the hardest parts of being a novice magician is the transition from theory to mana manipulation. For a human, using mana as a catalyst to form a magic circle in the air is a grueling mental labor. It isn't just about feeling the energy. It's like trying to code an entire operating system in your mind, Glenda thought as she watched Jay prepare for the next set. Without a screen, without a keyboard, and without the ability to fix a single bug. If you misplace one line of the 1,000-line equation, the program crashes, and in magic, a crash means your magic circle collapsed. And if it happens in the middle of intense battle, that's the end for you. The human brain wasn't evolved to hold that much geometric data while simultaneously supplying the electricity of mana to keep the lines stable. It required an impossible level of focus. Yet Jay didn't seem to struggle. It was as if his brain perceived language, geometry, and equations as a native tongue. He lacked the massive magical reserves of a witch like Augusta or a devil in general. He also didn't have the high mana affinity that Glenda possessed, which is a term magician usually used to people with natural ability that makes mana responds easily, flows smoothly, and feels intuitive. In fact, on the contrary, his affinity to mana was terrible in a sense. But that's exactly why he's better than almost magician I've known in perceiving mana, Glenda realized with a start. Because Jay didn't rely on instinct when performing his magic like most magician does. He treated magic as a puzzle to be solved with cold, hard logic. He didn't think, let's make just a circle, activate it, and then let it go kaboom. He thought, what is the most efficient geometric path to achieve the desired output? That's called multiple activation, Glenda said aloud, snapping back to the lesson. So, it's essentially like completing 3 different sets of calculus equations at the same time, Jay said, his eyes tracking the residual mana trails of her water spheres. Exactly. Most humans magicians usually only able to use one spell at a time, even though they compensate it with faster activation time. But in a real fight against a strong supernatural being, if you're only casting one spell at a time even if its activation time is fast, you're most likely going to be dead. The difference between a good and a great magician is that a good magician uses their mind to save time on one spell using quick mental activation, but a great magician is never afraid of a close-range combatant because they never relied on just activating one spell at a time. Glenda explained. Jay stood there, his mind humming. He wasn't just listening, he was rewriting his internal combat manual. You know, Glenda added, her voice dropping to a serious tone, that the Norse Valkyries can activate hundreds of spells simultaneously? Each one different? Fire, ice, gravity, all in the same microsecond. Jay's eyes widened, the first sign of genuine emotion he'd shown all day. Hundreds? At once? That's absurd. Are they even thinking at that point? The scary thing is, they do it instinctively, Glenda said while shaking her head, leaning against a pillar. Remember this, kid. Humans like us aren't supposed to be on their level. They are freaks of nature. This is why there isn't a single human in the top 100 strongest beings in the world. We are existentially capped. She looked at him significantly. Until the God of the Bible created the sacred gears. That's why it's called a Longinus, because it's supposed to be a way for humans to fight against those gods despite us being the weakest of them all. It's a way for the weak to kill the strong. She continued. A way for the weak to kill the strong, huh? Jay whispered. He had thought about it, even though he is learning magic as a way to get strong, he also planning to learning close combat. That's why despite his study, he's still saving some time to training his physics and swordmanship, even though it's technically still on amateur level right now, as Glenda said she can't help him with that. Beyond his own internal evolution, Jay knew that amassing an arsenal of high-tier weapons such as sacred gears and Longinus level would provide a necessary edge. However, the collection of such weapons was a mechanical nightmare. A sacred gear was a soul-bound program. To even attempt an extraction, the current host had to be eliminated. But death usually triggered a reset in the system, sending the gear back into the cycle. Without the knowledge of how to force a transfer, he was merely a killer with no way to harvest the spoils. Though beyond sacred gears, there are also godly artifacts scattered throughout the world, items like Indra's Vasvi Shakti or Thor's Mjolnir. But with my current strength, those are still far out of reach. For now, they're nothing more than a dream. Jay thought. The conversation drifted toward the nature of the research. Jay had spent hours being poked and prodded, demonstrating the heat threshold of his flames and the speed of his activation, yet he knew very little of Glenda's true goal. Is that why you're doing this? Jay asked, looking at the purple sparks on his fingertips. To research sacred gears so you can create one yourself? Glenda stayed silent for a moment, her face unreadable. You could say it's just curiosity, Jay. A witch without curiosity is just a woman with a pointed hat and a grumpy attitude. Oh, that's a rare self-awareness. Shut your mouth, brat. She didn't elaborate, and Jay didn't bother to push. He knew that Glenda kept her secrets tightly, and as he said before, he couldn't care enough about that. Now, Glenda said, straightening up. Try to do what I did. Create several activation circles simultaneously. Don't worry about the power it generates, just focus on the stability of the geometry and channeling your mana. Jay then focused his mind as he trying to create 3 identical magic circle like Glenda. The air in front of him flickered. 3 cerulean magic circle is slowly formed in front of him, glowing with a faint, unsteady light. But before he could channel the mana, the second circle's equation shifted, the lines crossed, and all 3 collapsed into a shower of harmless sparks. But it didn't explode or backfired on him in any shape or form. Just showing how good his control on magic right now is. It's failed but calculatingly. That's harder than it looks, Jay muttered. Of course it is, Glenda said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Increasing the number of activations isn't a linear curve of difficulty, it's a power function. You're trying to split your consciousness into 3 separate, independent processors. It takes years for normal magician to master even 2. She checked a small silver watch at her hip. All right, that's enough for today. I have an important meeting with someone in the human world, and I'll be gone for about a week. Stay here. Do not go into the city without me. You're my guest and not a magician of the Oz to anyone else. If you're caught without my signature, the Emerald City Guard will question you, and that will waste my time. Jay nodded. I understand. Glenda gathered her things and walked toward the exit. There's food in the larder. Read the books, but don't burn my basement. I mean it, Jay. Glenda, remembering how Jay's Incinerate Anthem destroyed her basement walls last week during their sacred gear test. With a swirl of her cloak, she was gone. The heavy obsidian door sealed shut, and the silence of the pocket dimension settled in like a shroud. Jay stood alone in the dark. She only told me not to go to the city, he thought, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She didn't say anything about going to the human world. Over the past 2 weeks, he had learned to perform several forms of spatial magic, one of them being teleportation, as it is surprisingly fairly easy for such amazing use of magic. Normally, teleportation magic is considered illegal when used to travel to realms such as the underworld, the heavens, or the worlds of the pantheons. However, because the human world and the dimensional gap are not governed by a single ruling entity or protected by a unified barrier, transferring from Emerald City to Earth posed no real problem. The reason why he wanted to get to the human world is that Jay had realized something fundamental about himself. He was learning at a rapid pace, but he was a scholar in a world of warriors. He had the equations, he had the power, but he lacked the friction of a real fight. Glenda refused to spar with him properly, claiming it was too early for him to face her without his sacred gear fully mastered yet. "Well, this is a pointless day of magic otherwise," Jay whispered. He felt the Incinerate Anthem humming under his skin, as he had discovered something that even Glenda didn't realize. But she is right on one thing though, sacred gears is such a cheat code. What Glenda does not realize is that, given enough control, the Incinerate Anthem itself can be used to create a magic circle. As Merlin said in The Roots, any corporeal thing that may serve as a vessel for mana is, in theory, apt to be awakened and wrought into a circle of magic. Usually, magicians formed circles in the air using raw mana, which was like trying to draw in a pool of water. Or they wrote them out with pens on paper, which was slow and tedious. But Jay had the Incinerate Anthem. Because the fire of the Incinerate Anthem is itself a physical form of mana, it is the ideal medium for a magic circle. Most magicians, even someone as skilled as Glenda, must create magic circles by carefully shaping mana by hand, or by drawing them with pens or chalk. Both methods require deliberate physical actions, much like writing each line one by one. A sacred gear works differently. Instead of manually forming a circle, it directly projects the magic circle stored in the user's mind into the physical world. The process is closer to printing than writing, with Incinerate Anthem acting as the printer, with controls similar to adjusting the resolution of an image before it appears. However, describing this as simple control greatly understates the difficulty. Creating a complex magic circle filled with equations using fire alone and entirely within the mind on top of that demands extraordinary precision to manifest. Only with near-perfect control can such technique succeed. Within 3 seconds, a massive, glowing purple magic circle appeared beneath his feet, perfect in its resolution, every line of the equation sharp and stable. Just blazing. By using the fire as the circle itself, he bypassed the cognitive load Glenda had warned him about. He didn't have to hold the equation in his mind while pumping mana constantly at the same time. He didn't need to write hundreds of magical circle to activate hundreds of spell. He can just make one in his mind and print it 100 times. Though it require an enormous amount of mana, but that price is justified for an instant multi-activation and almost no risk of failing magic circle generator. After that, then a blaze engulfed his body as he muttered, "Teleportation." Chapter 13, House of Manther. The moon over Verona was a sliver of polished bone, casting a long sharp shadows across the ancient cobblestones. Jay moved through the city like a ghost, his black coat fluttering in the cold wind as he moving from one building to another in the darkness of Verona using a simple enchantment magic. He had spent 8 hours scouring the urban sprawl and the surrounding countryside, his senses dialed to their absolute limit, searching for the telltale rot of a stray devil's signature. He found nothing. The air in Italy was too clean, at least in a spiritual sense. I should have anticipated this, Jay thought, his breath hitching in a small cloud of frost. Italy, especially the corridor between Rome and the Vatican, is the logistical and spiritual heart of the Church. Their purification barriers and active patrols of exorcists make this a holy zone. A stray devil would have to be either suicidal maniac or a god-tier entity to nest here, even if they are usually not right in head. He leaned against a stone wall, his dark eyes scanning the empty street, and enjoying the night view of Verona alone in the middle of the night. This feeling, the moon on the sky, it's supposed to be beautiful. But to him it's just a reminiscing a nightmare fueled with blood and grief. He sat there on top of the building for a couple minutes, seeping the hatred in his heart before planning his next move. If the prey won't come to the light, then let's go where the church influence aren't as big, he whispered. He closed his eyes, visualizing the map of his journey from Romania to Italy. He recalled the dense, ancient forests of Hungary and the rural outskirts of the Balkan states. Some places where the church's reach was thin and the old blood still ran deep, but still remotely close to Verona, as he didn't have the capacity in a very long distance without exhausting his mana. He tapped his heel. The purple flame of the Incinerate Anthem bloomed beneath him, instantly printing the complex spatial runes of a long-distance jump into the stone. The sheer speed of his activation would have made Glenda's head spin. It wasn't the work of a supposed novice magician, it was a super high-speed activation of complex spell. Teleportation. The world folded. As Jay teleported it from place to place that he had visited during his 4 days of journey to Verona. From Venice to Zagreb and then Ljubljana, he moving from city to city thousands miles away until the smell of Central Europe Victorian stone building was replaced by the damp, heavy aroma of pine needles and stagnant lake water. Jay materialized on a high ridge overlooking Lake Balaton in Hungary. The Hungarian Sea was a dark obsidian expanse under the moonlight, surrounded by dense, suffocating forests. Almost immediately Jay felt it. A violent, jagged surge of mana ripped through the air, coming from a clearing about a mile to his north. It wasn't the chaotic, oily feel of a devil nor the sterile, cold power of a magician. It was a clash between a cacophony of holy power and something ancient, predatory, and metallic but still familiar. Jay moved. He didn't run, instead he used localized spatial shifts, flickering from shadow to shadow with the efficiency of a predator. Within minutes, he was perched in the high branches of an ancient oak tree, his presence completely erased by meticulous mana suppression. Below him, the forest clearing had been turned into a slaughterhouse. Around 12 church exorcists were engaged in a desperate, losing battle. Jay's eyes narrowed as he analyzed them. Most were teenagers, some of them looked no older than 14. They wore sleek, form-fitting tactical suits with a high durability, white and blue spandex-like material reinforced with woven silver threads and protective sigils. What is the Vatican thinking? Jay thought, a flash of cynical humor crossing his mind. Sending children into the woods wearing high-tech spandex. It looks more like a low-budget superhero flick than a holy crusade. Sister Andrea used to talk about the dignity of the cloth, she'd have had a stroke seeing this. But beneath the light-heartedness, a cold anger simmered. He knew the rumors. He had read the forbidden archives in Glenda's library. The Heaven faction and the church's upper echelons often viewed human orphans as expendable assets. They were project kids, a standardized soldiers bred or trained for high-risk containment. He bore no anger toward the children, nor toward most exorcists in general. After all, Sister Andrea had once been one of them. But the higher-ups, the leaders of the churches, the popes, and even the angels were another matter entirely. Bunch of filthy creatures rotted by a superiority complex and drunk on unchecked authority. But the exorcists were currently being systematically dismantled by a single figure. The man was beautiful in a way that felt wrong, a doll-like face with skin the color of bleached parchment and hair as white as a fresh shroud. He wore a high-collared Victorian-style coat that seemed to drink the moonlight. Every time he moved, he left a blurred trail of crimson afterimages. Not a devil, Jay noted, his hazel eyes tracking the creature's speed, his appearance familiar. Those red eyes still give him shivers even if he's trying to deny it. Vampire. The feast of the noble. Is this truly the best the cross can provide? The vampire laughed. His voice was melodic, carrying the chilling resonance of a flute played in a tomb. I was promised a challenge and I am given appetizers. Shut up, monster! A young male exorcist screamed, lunging forward with a consecrated silver blade. His movements were fast but driven by panic. The vampire didn't even draw a weapon. He simply pivoted on his heel, his white hair whipping through the air. In a blur of motion he caught the boy's wrist, snapped the bone with a sickening crack, and pulled the boy flush against his chest. Too much adrenaline, the vampire whispered into the boy's ear, his fangs extending, gleaming like polished ivory. It makes the blood taste bitter. He bit down. The boy's scream was cut short as the vampire began to drain him. Jay watched from the trees, his pulse steady. He saw the vampire's aura flare with every drop of blood consumed was being converted into raw physical power and accelerated regeneration. The vampire wasn't just winning, he was leveling up mid-battle. One by one the exorcists fell. The vampire was toying with them, moving with an arrogance that only centuries of immortality could breed. He didn't kill them all instantly, he disabled them and drained them until they lost consciousness, then tossed them aside like empty juice boxes. Finally, only 2 remained standing at the center of the clearing. One was a girl with striking, long blue hair. Her tactical suit was shredded, revealing deep gashes across her shoulders and thighs, yet she held a massive, broadsword-style holy blade with white-knuckled intensity. Her eyes were burning with a terrifying, suicidal determination. Beside her was a younger girl with chestnut hair and wide, violet eyes. She was trembling so violently that her rapier clattered against her greaves. "Irina, get back," the blue-haired girl hissed, her voice rasping. "But Zinovia, he's stronger than the reports said." "We need to retreat, we cannot win," the younger one sobbed. "I won't leave them," Zinovia replied, stepping forward. The vampire wiped a smear of blood from his lip, his red eyes fixed on the blue-haired girl. You have a delightful scent. High holy potential. Your blood will be the vintage I save for the dawn." Zinovia roared a raw, guttural sound and charged forward. The clash was deafening. She swung the broadsword with a strength that defied her slim frame. Every strike sent a shockwave of holy energy through the air, singing the grass. But she was unrefined. She swung with her heart, not her head. Amateur, Jay thought, watching from above. As amateur as he is right now in swordmanship, but Jay had witnessed how Sister Andrea wielded a sword in her hand, battling against a far more stronger vampire than this arrogant prick. He knew that even if Zinovia has glimpse of brilliance, she is still too raw. The vampire danced around her. He was laughing now, a high, mocking sound. Such passion. Such waste. "Shut up, Manther." Zinovia swung again, a horizontal cleave meant to take his head. The vampire dropped into a low crouch, then lunged forward. As Zinovia tried to pivot to follow him, a stray gust of wind blew her long unkempt blue hair across her face. In that microsecond she was blind. It was a fatal tactical error. The vampire didn't miss the opening. He bypassed her blade, his hand shooting out like a viper to catch her by the throat. He lifted her off the ground, her boots dangling in the air. With his feet, he kicked her holy blade away as it spun through the air and thudded into the dirt 50 feet away. Weak. So much weakness. How do those filthy churches even allow an inexperienced, amateur, green exorcist like you to hunt me? A high noble of the prestigious house of Manther. Such insulting conduct, the vampire purred, his fingers tightening around her windpipe. Zinovia clawed at his hand, her face turning a bruised purple. "Your little friends will die because you were too weak to protect them. Your mission is a failure. Your god is silent. And now you will be my vessel." He tilted her head back, exposing her jugular. The chestnut-haired girl screamed, tripping as she tried to reach her friend. Jay felt a cold ripple of bloodlust stir in his chest. His hazel eyes sharpened, pupils narrowing into slits. He had seen enough. He had been waiting for this moment. He did not want to merely kill the bat. He wanted to crush his ego, his pride, and everything he stands for, then burn the remnants in the purifying flame of the Incinerate Anthem. The vampire opened his mouth, his fangs inches from Zinovia's skin, when a sudden, blinding flash of white light erupted in his peripheral vision. It wasn't a holy spell. It was a discharge of concentrated burst of light and heat. A magic. The vampire's supernatural instinct screamed. He dropped Zinovia and backflipped away, his boots skidding across the grass. "Who's there?" he shrieked, his red eyes darting toward the tree-line. "Show yourself, pussy." He scanned the shadows, but he detected nothing. No mana signature, no heartbeat, no scent. Suddenly, the vampire felt a cold draft against the back of his neck. He spun around, his claws extended, but he only met empty air. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a gloved hand seemingly detached from the world, reaching out from a shimmering rift in space toward the back of his throat. He gasped, pushing his speed to its absolute limit. He managed to dodge by a fraction of an inch, the glove grazing the silk of his collar. That hand, it appeared out of nowhere, the vampire thought, his heart which has been long dead actually thumping with a phantom rhythm of fear. No movement, no sound, just a spatial rip? "Don't be a pussy and fight me," the vampire roared in Romanian, his composure crumbling into primal rage. The 2 girls on the ground watched in stunned silence. Zenobia, gasping for air and clutching her bruised throat, looked toward the oak tree where the shadow had emerged. A figure stepped out from behind the trunk, descending to the forest floor with a weightless grace. He wore a full black cloak, the heavy fabric seemingly woven from the darkness itself. The hood was pulled low, casting his face into an impenetrable shadow. His hands were clad in sleek black gloves. It was Jay. He had donned the concealment cloak Glenda had given him. An artifact designed to mask a magician's presence from even high-tier devils. Jay stood perfectly still. He didn't reach for a sword. He didn't draw a magic circle. He simply watched the vampire with a terrifying, static focus. There is no sudden movement, no sudden breath, just a calm, standing man. The vampire hissed, crouching low. So, the church sent a fucking magician to supervise the exorcist, huh? Isn't that funny, ha ha ha. Imagine calling the practice of magic as a pagan rituals only to be associated themselves with it. Such a dash. Shut the fuck up. Jay's voice came from the shadows of the hood with cold, flat, and devoid of any youthful tremor in a fluent Romanian. The vampire's smile disappeared. Before he grinned, his ego returning as he realized his opponent was alone and physically smaller than him. Little man, I am a noble of the house of Manther. I have tasted the blood of kings and saints. What are you but a shadow in a blanket? Jay shifted his stance slightly, a tiny spark of purple fire dancing between his gloved fingers. Now let's dance. The vampire exclaimed before he vanished. To the human eye, he simply ceased to exist. To Jay, he was a crimson blur moving at very high speed. The vampire circled Jay, trying to find an opening, his claws whistling through the air as he tested Jay's reflexes. Jay didn't turn to follow him. He didn't need to. He closed his eyes and sensed the space displacement. Every time the vampire moved, he created a ripple in space, which is the trigger of one of Jay's spatial magic spell. Domain of his own. The spell that created a spatial layer of fabrics around him, to detect and anticipate the movement of his enemy through the ripple there created to the said spatial layer of fabric he planted. Combined with Incinerate Anthem instantaneous activation, it creates an almost sure hit effect. There. Jay pivoted on a dime, his gloved hand catching the vampire's wrist in midair using a simple enchantment magic in his hand. Though Jay still felt a strain because his mastery of enchantment magics is severely behind his spatial magic. The vampire's eyes bulged. Impossible. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He activated a localized spatial anchor. The vampire found himself frozen in place, his momentum suddenly hitting a brick wall of fixed space. Before the vampire of House of Manther could react, Jay's other hand shot forward, palm open. Shring! A focused blast of light hit the vampire in the chest, creating a blast that launched him backwards. The noble screamed as the light ate through his reinforced coat and began to char his ancient flesh. Jay has learned that the biggest weakness of vampire is sunlight, and light in general, so blast of light magic is having almost the same effect as fire to humans. It burns. He retreated, smoke billowing from his torso, his regeneration struggling to keep up with the intense heat. Huh. Why you? Who are you? The vampire screamed in anger as Jay felt the power within him is being multiplied by tenfolds. But he didn't panic, his hazel eyes glowing beneath the hood. As he just stepped forward, nobody noticed but a flicker of purple flame blazing from his glove as he stared down the vampire. Jay then opened his mouth in a muttering voice which only the vampire could heard. I am. Vengeance. Chapter 14, Osmanthus. Steam rose from the vampire's body in hissing plumes, but Jay didn't wait for the creature to finish whatever transformation was occurring. He instantly enchanted his right leg, using the Incinerate Anthem to replicate the spell on his left simultaneously. With flickers of purple embers at his heels, he lunged. The burst of speed was so immense that even Jay felt a jolt of surprise at his own velocity. He was a blur, a dark streak aimed at the noble's throat. However, just as his fingers were about to make contact, leathery wings erupted from the vampire's back with a violent tear of fabric. The noble ascended with terrifying grace, narrowly dodging the strike. Ha ha ha. You filthy human. I thought you'd The vampire's taunt died in his throat. Jay didn't let him finish. In a flash of purple light, Jay teleported directly behind the creature in midair. He tripled the reinforcement in his right leg and delivered a devastating kick that sent the vampire hurtling back toward the earth like a plummeting carcass. Before the vampire could even find his footing in the dirt, a flicker of purple embers signaled Jay's arrival. He was already standing there, waiting. As Jay reached out, a dangerous sensation flared in his mind. With a predatory hiss, the noble manther lashed out, his clawed hands whistling through the air, inches from splitting Jay's face in half. Jay leaned back just enough to let the claws pass. His spell warned him. This was the reason why, alongside teleportation, his domain of his own was the most vital spell in his arsenal. It served as his primary defense, but it was not merely a spell to reinforce his body so that incoming attacks would deal less damage and felt less hurt. It was a defensive technique he personally favored. It functioned as a 360-degree Hawkeye, not through visual sight, but through mana receptors that sent instant signals to his brain. This spell is made through Jay understanding that mana was a continuum of energy, existing in both a micro and macroscopic sense. Hence it is possible to create an instant receptor in the fabric of space. Any movement the vampire made created a ripple in that fabric. Jay didn't need to see the attack, he felt the displacement of space a fraction of a second before it happened. Jay stepped back to create space, his movements efficient and cold. He watched with clinical detachment as the vampire swung his other hand in a wide, desperate arc to force a gap between them. Meanwhile, Zenobia and Irina were huddled near the edge of the clearing. Irina was weeping silently, her hands glowing with a faint, trembling gold light as she tried to stabilize the most heavily wounded of their comrades. Zenobia stood guard, her body shaking from blood loss and wounds, but her eyes fixed on the man in the black cloak. "Who is he?" Irina whispered, her voice a fragile thread. He's fighting a manther with nothing but magic. No ritual, no circle, just him." Zenobia didn't answer. She saw her sword. It is a large, uniquely shaped broadsword with a blue blade and a golden edge. The sword has a semicircular guard on the left side of the handle that extends to the bottom just above the pommel, with a small extension on the right side of the handle. The Holy Sword de Randall. It's lying in the mud 50 feet away. It was a holy relic, a fragment of divinity, and it felt like a betrayal to see it discarded in the mud while a stranger fought her battles. As a holy word wielder she also failed, as an exorcist she also failed, but the worst thing is she failed as a leader. She gritted her teeth, clenching his hand and forcing her leaden legs to move. She had to help. She had to reclaim her pride. She limped forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to step into the battle and grab her sword. But before he could do that, Jay didn't turn around. He stayed locked in, silence confrontation with the vampire as none of them moved and calculating their move. "Let me handle this," he said. Zenobia froze. The voice was deep, steady, and filtered through the mask of the hood, but there was an unmistakable resonance of youth in it. He didn't sound like a wizened master or a veteran priest. He sounded like a boy. Someone who couldn't be more than a few years older than her. "But this is my mission," Zenobia protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Your mission ended when you lost your sword," Jay replied, his tone flat. It's harsh and cold truth that makes Zenobia just stared with a complicated look. Her body just stopped moving forward. After silence, Jay and the vampire then collided again, but this time the air didn't just ripple. It torns. Jay was pushing himself into a state of hyperfocus. He had spent 2 weeks in a basement exploring the logic of reality through magic, and now he was finally applying the fruit of his study despite it being such in a short time into a real battle. He wasn't using the Incinerate Anthem to simply burn his way to victory, as he was using the vampire as a live test subject for his magic. "This guy is faster than my activation speed, I need to close the range," Jay thought, his mind working like a high-speed processor. He flickered. To the vampire, Jay was a stuttering image in reality. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he appeared directly above the noble's head. Jay didn't swing a fist as he pointed 2 fingers downward. Light magic. A thin, blindingly bright spike of light shot from his fingertips. The vampire hissed and twisting his body midair with a flexibility that defied human anatomy. The needle of light grazed his shoulder, instantly cauterizing the flesh and leaving a smoking black line. "Fucking annoying dog," the vampire snarled, his wings beating the air into a frenzy. "You're honestly just annoying in every possible way." The noble disappeared in a burst of crimson speed. Jay's domain of his own immediately sent a signal. Rapid distortion. 4 o'clock. Low angle. Jay didn't turn. He didn't have time. He poured mana into his left leg. Enchantment, kinetic burst. He stomped the ground, the enchantment exploding outward and launching him 6 feet into the air just as the vampire's claws raked the space where his shins had been a millisecond prior. While airborne, Jay twisted his torso. He saw the vampire's white hair whipping as the creature looked up in shock. Jay locked a point in the air behind the vampire in a millisecond using a tether of mana. He yanked himself toward that point, effectively reversing his momentum instantly. He swung a heavy, enchanted kick toward the vampire's temple. Crack! The vampire raised a leathery wing to shield himself. The kick connected, the reinforced kinetic energy tearing through the wing's membrane and sending the noble skidding across the dirt. How is he even able to master the spatial magic to that extent? The vampire shrieked, his eyes glowing with a manic, blood-red light. Jay fighting style is too unpredictable and too absurd for him to even predict. Jay landed silently, but his vision flickered for a brief second. My mana is just around 40%, I need to think another way, Jay calculated. He could feel that the effect of using teleportation spell back to back in such short period of time caused a negative feedback both in his mana reserves and also his body. Spatial magic mana consumption is almost astronomical compared to his enchantment and light-based magic. Not to mention he also has used in it multiple times to teleport place by place from Verona to this place. And also there is a slight nausea that came from forcing his body through the fabric of space too many times in a short window. Glenda had warned him that spatial magic was the most taxing discipline for a reason. The vampire saw the slight hesitation. He didn't charge directly this time. He began to run in a circle around Jay, his speed increasing until he was nothing more than a blurred ring of snow-white hair and red afterimages. He realized that Jay always steps ahead of him, and reacting his attack like he can predict the future. So he changed his strategy. If he predict 1 or 2 attacks, let's see how he would respond to this. He thought. The vampire was trying to overload Jay's domain. Ripple. 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 The signals were hitting Jay's brain too fast. It was like 100 people whispering different directions at once. Can you track this? The vampire's voice echoed from everywhere at once. Suddenly, the vampire lunged. Jay prepared to teleport, but his domain picked up a secondary, silent ripple from the opposite side. A bait? Jay widened his eyes, but before he could process the signal he received. The vampire had thrown his heavy Victorian coat to one side while moving at high speed, creating a false thermal and spatial signature. The Manther Noble was coming from the blind spot. Jay tried to pivot, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. The noble's claws found their mark. Shred. The sharp nails tore through the heavy fabric of Jay's cloak and bit deep into the muscle of his left forearm. Red-hot blood and vivid sprayed onto the grass. Jay didn't scream. He used the momentum of the hit to roll away, putting distance between them. He stood up, clutching his bleeding arm as his breathing finally turning heavy. The wound was deep, he could feel the vampire's necrotic mana trying to seep into his bloodstream to slow his heart. There it is, the vampire purred, landing gracefully and licking the blood from his claws. The scent of mortality. You're fast, kid. But magic is just math. And in nature, the predator always outruns the mathematician. Jay stared at his bleeding arm, then at the vampire. His hazel eyes didn't show fear. They showed a cold and clinical irritation. The magic isn't enough, Jay realized. I have the knowledge, but my body lacks the capacity to bridge the gap in raw physicality. I need a medium to hold the equations for me. His gaze shifted to the side. There, 50 feet away, the bluish blade of Durandal was still stuck in the earth, vibrating with a low holy hum. In a flicker of violet embers, Jay teleported. He didn't go for the vampire. He reappeared directly over the hilt of the bluish sword stuck in the dirt. He gripped the hilt. The vampire froze, a wide, mocking grin splitting his face. Ha ha ha. What is this? A magician reaching for a sword? You don't even know which end to hold, boy. You are a scholar trying to be a warrior. Zenobia gasped. No. Don't touch it. Durandal will reject you. It's a holy. She stopped. As Jay's gloved hand closed around the hilt, the sword didn't spark with holy rejection. Instead, the massive broadsword, which Zenobia found heavy and cumbersome, seemed to hum in Jay's hand. His gaze then arrived at the vampire as he thought. Let's finish this. Chapter 15, Durandal. Let's finish this. seeing Jay with a sword in his hand. A magician with a sword is just a kid with a toothpick. The vampire muttered with a mock. He then grinned and screamed. Let me teach you how to swing. The vampire lunged, his body becoming a streak of crimson. Jay swung the massive blade in a wide, desperate arc to intercept. Clank! The collision sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. Jay had successfully parried the strike, but the feedback was brutal. The weight of the vampire swing and the sword itself was immense, and Jay's lack of formal training showed immediately. His grip faltered, the hilt nearly sliding through his fingers as the vampire's superior physical strength sent a jarring shock through his shoulders. Clank! The vampire didn't give him a moment to reset. He pivoted, his claws coming in a low, horizontal sweep. Jay didn't have the footwork to dodge, so he slammed the flat of the blade into the dirt, using the massive sword as a makeshift shield. The claws raked across the blue steel with a screeching sound that set Jay's teeth on edge. He was being pushed back, his boots carving deep lines in the mud as he struggled to maintain his balance against the sheer weight of the weapon. Clank! The friction of the battle was a brutal teacher, and Jay was a fast learner. The initial clumsiness, the staggering weight of the blade and the jarring shock of the parries began to smooth out into something terrifyingly efficient. Each time their weapons collided, the physical gap that separated a human novice from a vampire noble grew thinner, erased by the cold and relentlessness of Jay. Jay felt a jolt of electricity run up his arm. It wasn't the searing burn of the church's light, it was a cadenza of pure focused energy. The sword felt right somehow. It felt as though his own mana, usually cold and resistant, found a resonance in the ancient steel. He felt his body become lighter as his perceptions sharpening until the world seemed to move in slow motion. Zenobia watched, her heart thumping against her ribs. She saw the stranger nearly lose the blade in the first two exchanges, looking like a total amateur. But by the third the rhythm changed. And suddenly it's as if her sword is his naturally. This is a crazy sword, Jay thought. The cadenza of the purplish blue. The Manther noble felt the shift in the air immediately. The advantage he had in physicality and speed seemed to evaporate in an instant. Jay moved. It wasn't the jagged mechanical teleportation from before. From a heavy swings it was turned into a fluid sweeping dash. He swung the massive blade, and it felt like an extension of his own arm. Clank! The vampire tried to block with his reinforced claws, but the impact sent him skidding back 30 feet. His eyes widened in pure disbelief. What the fuck, you were just a kid swinging a stick a second ago. How are you, Dash? Jay didn't let him finish. He felt the sword harmonizing with his Incinerate Anthem. The bluish aura of the blade began to shift, swirling with a dark purplish tint. The holy light of Durandal was being dyed by Jay's unique mana, creating a terrifying violet-blue flame that licked the edges of the steel. Zenobia watched in absolute awe. Durandal, it's changing. It's transforming. She had never seen the blade react this way. She knew that Durandal could transform into type of Excalibur, but this is different. Jay let his instincts take over. He didn't think about the sword techniques Sister Andrea had shown him during her fight, he simply allowed the connection to the sword to guide his movements. He became a whirlwind of purple afterimages. Slash. Parry. Riposte. The vampire was being pressed hard, his wings shredded by the violet-blue aura. He tried to fly away again, but Jay swung the sword into empty air. The purplish-blue arc of energy didn't travel through the air as it suddenly vanished and reappeared directly behind the vampire's back. Aggggghhhhhh, the noble screamed as the holy energy, combined with Incinerate Anthem aura, carved a deep cauterized canyon into his spine. The vampire was in a state of pure fury and terror. He realized he wasn't fighting a priest or an assassin. He was fighting something that defied the natural order of the supernatural world. He spread his wings wide, trying to make a final desperate dash for the clouds. He didn't care about his pride anymore, he just wanted to survive this disastrous night. A night that's supposed to be an enjoyable dinner, a farming season. I will be back, human, the vampire yelled as he climbed. But Jay didn't chase him. He stood calmly, a flicker of purple embers blazing from the hilt of the sword. Then he didn't swing his sword, instead he charged his elbow and then threw the sword towards the flying vampire like a hunting Kalidbolg. The sword left Jay's hand with incredible velocity, tearing through space and spinning like a propeller of violet light. Stupid. You thought that would hit me, the vampire yelled as he flung. but mid-flight the sword vanished into a spatial rift. A split second later, the vampire felt a cold, sharp intrusion in his chest. The purplish-blue sword had emerged from a rift directly behind him, piercing through his back and out through his sternum. The force of the throw, combined with the spatial momentum, launched him down toward the ground like a pinned insect. He was impaled to the earth, the blade buried deep into the soil. Aga! The vampire noble of the House of Manther thrashed, but the holy aura of the sword acted like a divine anchor, paralyzing his nervous system. Zenobia and Irina couldn't move. They had spent years training, being told that vampires were the apex predators of the night. Yet here was a nameless man in a cloak, who had just used a holy sword to pin a noble like a specimen in a jar. Impaled him like a kebabs. Jay walked toward the screaming vampire. Each step was deliberate. With a flicker of purple embers, he activated a wide-range teleportation circle as the purple embers engulfing himself and the impaled noble. In a flash, they were gone from the clearing, reappearing on the desolate moonlit shore of Lake Balaton. The vampire was still screaming, his blood staining the white sand of the beach. He looked up at Jay, his beautiful doll-like face now a mask of weeping sores and terror. "Please!" the noble shrieked, his voice breaking. "Don't kill me. I have everything you want. Money, ancient artifacts, the most beautiful women from every races. I can give you immortality. Anything you want, human." Jay stood over him, the moon reflecting in his dark hazel eyes. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the gentle lapping of the lake water against the shore. "What is a human to you?" Jay finally asked in an empty tone. The vampire blinked, his mind racing to find an answer that would save his life. "Human, yeah, they are our neighbors. We live and share this beautiful world. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. We can coexist." A purple ember flickered on the vampire's left leg. It didn't activate a spell. It just burned. "Arg heh. Try again," Jay said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Speak your mind." The vampire's eyes glazed over with a mixture of agony and realization. He looked at Jay and for the first time he saw the hollow void behind the boy's gaze piercing from the shadow of his hood. He knew there was no mercy coming. If he was going to die, he would die with the truth of his kind. "Humans." The vampire spat, blood bubbling in his throat. "You are food. You are livestock. You are filthy, short-lived creatures that exist only to fuel our greatness. Does a farmer care for the plea of the cattle he slaughters for his dinner? No. There is no evil in survival. It just so happens that your race is at the bottom of the food chain. You are nothing but walking blood bags." He laughed then, a crazed, rattling sound. "Kill me. But remember that for every one of me there are 1,000 others feasting on your kind right now. You are prey." Jay stared at him. The silence stretched. Then Jay began to laugh. It wasn't a hero's laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound that came from deep in his chest. It was the first time Jay had laughed since his world had been reduced to ash in Romania. He laughed for a good 10 seconds, the sound echoing across the dark lake. "Thank you, Bat," Jay said. The vampire looked up with a glimmer of hope. "Yes, you understand? You see the logic? Please spare me." Jay's laughter died instantly. His face returned to that cold, static mask. "I understand perfectly," Jay said. "But I've never seen a human plead for their life to their cattle." The vampire's eyes widened to the size of saucers. "Wait dash." Jay didn't wait. He didn't use a spell. He didn't use a sword. He simply released the Incinerate Anthem at full output. A pillar of violet flame erupted from the vampire's body, reaching toward the sky. There was no smoke, no smell of burning meat. Only the sound of a soul being erased from existence. In a single second, the noble of the House of Manther was reduced to a handful of gray ash that the wind immediately scattered across the surface of the lake. Jay stood alone in the dark. There was no sense of triumph. No happiness. Only that familiar, heavy hollowness. He looked at the reflection of the moon in the water, his mind drifting back to the library, to the blood on the floor and to the silence of his own heart. He looked down at the sword. The purplish-blue aura had faded, returning to its original state. A beautiful, golden-edged blue blade. He picked it up and vanished. Back in the clearing, Irina had successfully stabilized and healed the drained young exorcists. None of them had died, though they would be bedridden for weeks. Zenobia sat in the dirt, her head in her hands, her mind reeling from everything she had witnessed. Clank! The sound of metal hitting the earth made both girls jump. Stuck in the ground between them was Durandal. The sword was clean, the mud and gore seemingly washed away by its own holy aura. Zenobia looked around wildly, but there was no one there. The man in the black cloak had returned her weapon and vanished without a word. He gave it back, Irina whispered, clutching her chest. I thought he was going to steal it. Zenobia stood up, her fingers closing around the familiar hilt. The sword felt heavy again. Cumbersome. Not like it had felt in the hands of that stranger when she saw him wield it. Who was he? Zenobia asked the empty forest. Who could use Durandal like that and then just walk away? She looked toward the trees, but only the wind answered her. Hidden in the deep darkness of a high oak tree, Jay watched them for a moment longer. He saw that they were safe, that these young human exorcists would live to see another day. He felt the weight of his own mana exhaustion pulling at his consciousness. A flicker of purple embers blazed at his feet. Time to go back, he whispered. In a flash of violet light, the clearing was empty, leaving only the sound of the wind and the two young girls staring into the night.